What's up, guys? Don't forget to smash that like button, drop a comment, hype up the video, and if you're new here, hit that subscribe and join the family. Guys, if you want to support the channel and get something cool, check the first link in the description. Use my code HugoHenriqueMore to get 10% off on anime lamps. At the entrance of Mount Ye Manor, a young man sat looking a bit shaken. His name was Zhu Xian, a transmigrant from the modern world who had just learned the story of the body he now inhabited, one that shared his name. That body belonged to an illegitimate son of the Ye family's patriarch. Weak and cowardly, he had grown up without a mother and wasn't even allowed to bear the Ye surname. Even the family head despised him. Moreover, in the Longyuan nation, where martial strength was valued far above culture, he lacked even the basic spiritual roots necessary for cultivation. With all those misfortunes combined, he was the kind of person anyone in the manor could bully without consequence. Recently, that boy had fallen into the water and nearly drowned. That was the moment when Zhu Xian transmigrated into his body. Suddenly, someone slapped his shoulder, cursing at him and asking what he was doing there, mockingly implying that he must be thinking about the mother who had disappeared without a trace. Other men came over laughing, saying maybe his mother had just been some random woman by the roadside, or perhaps a brothel girl, since no one really knew. The protagonist grew irritated and told them all to shut up. One of the men froze, wondering if he was hearing things. There was no way that coward would ever dare to talk back. Zhu Xian stared straight at them and said they hadn't misheard, and if they still doubted it, he'd repeat himself. Word for word, he ordered them to shut the hell up immediately. The mocking man grew furious, grabbed him by the collar, and said he must be eager for a beating. Zhu Xian thought he'd really like to fight back, but he simply didn't have the power. Suddenly, another voice approached, asking what was going on. The three turned around and saw a young girl pointing at them, repeating the question and reminding them that, like it or not, he was still the patriarch's son. If they kept bullying him, she would report them to the madam. The girl was Ye Qifang, 16 years old, with a cultivation level of Wu Jing. One of the boys whispered to his leader that she was just a kitchen apprentice, but rumor had it the madam liked her a lot, so they'd better not cause trouble. They released Zhu Xian and ran off, threatening him and saying that if they caught him outside again, he'd get another beating. The others told the older brother to calm down. It wasn't worth risking punishment over a piece of trash like that. Qifang walked closer, reached out her hand and asked if Zhu Xian was okay. He looked at her and, from the body's lingering memories, recognized her. Ye Qifang, the kitchen girl, the only one in the manor who had ever shown him a shred of kindness, probably because her own status was low as well. When he took her hand, an unfamiliar energy surged through his palm, and a notification appeared before his eyes. Leisure System for Disciples had been activated. Shocked, Zhu Xian thought it actually made sense. After all, he'd transmigrated, so having a system wasn't strange at all. The system spoke. You can recruit female disciples. As they study life and leisure skills, you will gain experience points. As their levels, and your own, rise, new disciples and skills will be unlocked. Then, it displayed, disciple slots available. Beginner task, quickly recruit a disciple skilled in life and leisure arts. Zhu Xian was stunned. Could even leisure activities make him level up? Ye Qifang, curious, leaned in to see what he was staring at and asked if something was there, since he'd been standing still for so long. Jian turned his gaze to her, realizing a potential disciple was standing right before him. He smiled and asked if she would like to be his disciple. Qifang, confused, asked if he was okay. Had he perhaps hit his head when he fell? Because he was saying some really strange things. Given their situation, she joked, shouldn't he be the disciple instead? She chuckled and said that if calling her a disciple would make him feel better, then fine. She'd accept, waving her hand as she walked away back to the kitchen. As soon as she left, energy began to swirl around Zhu Xian's body, and the system announced, disciple successfully recruited, Ye Qifang, leisure skill, cooking, reward, spiritual roots activated. From the moment Ye Qifang begins cooking eggs, you will start gaining experience points. A short while later, inside the kitchen, the smell of boiled eggs filled the air. The head cook asked if they were ready, and Qifang replied yes before hurrying off to serve them. Outside, the protagonist watched quietly, noticing his experience bar begin to rise. 1 point every second. Surprised, he muttered that he was really gaining experience. Qifang kept cooking, preparing a full dinner. The other kitchen workers watched her, whispering among themselves. One of them told the head cook that the girl was an idiot for wasting her own money and cooking for 3 people. The head cook shrugged and replied that she really was a fool, but that it was better to leave her that way. After all, this way, they didn't have to do anything and still got paid. Outside, a faint glow began spreading across the area as Zhu Xian's experience rose rapidly. The system congratulated him. Disciple Ye Qifang's cooking skill has improved. Congratulations, you've reached the entry level. Smiling, Zhu Xian burst out laughing and shouted that she should cook more. maybe even make food for the entire city. Another window appeared before him. Choose a leisure skill: weaving, painting, music, chess, architecture, fishing, blacksmithing, or medicine. He thought that in this world, anything not directly related to combat counted as a leisure skill, so he chose one at random. Selecting fishing, he decided to test it out. He went to the lake, sat down, and cast his line into the water, but soon started complaining that it was even more boring than he imagined, since he actually had to catch a fish to gain experience. And by now, it was already noon with no success at all. Suddenly, he felt the line pull tight and jumped in surprise, shouting that he finally caught one. He pulled hard and tried to grab it, but a distant scream for help distracted him, and the fish smacked him square in the face. Confused, he stood up and asked where that scream had come from, looking around but seeing no one. Still, he was sure he had heard someone calling for help. At that exact moment, near the lake inside a small house, Ye Qifeng was violently thrown against the wall, injured and terrified, asking what they were doing. The leader of those three men had a crazed look in his eyes, smiling darkly as he said this was exactly what she deserved for meddling that afternoon. He cursed her and said he'd make sure she forgot everything before the night was over. Stretching out his hand, he declared with malice that he'd now collect his fee in a very personal way. But suddenly, a violent impact struck him in the head, sending him crashing through the window. The protagonist had appeared in the middle of the three, hurling their leader aside with ease. One of the men prepared to fight, shouting in disbelief how that piece of trash dared to attack their boss. Xiu Xian looked down at himself in surprise, saying he really had leveled up, and the boost was incredible, as his legs felt much stronger. The man charged at him from behind, yelling why he was turning his back, thinking he was being ignored, but the next instant, Xiu Xian vanished before his eyes. Confused, the man shouted where he'd gone, only for Xian to appear behind him, murmuring that his speed had also improved significantly. The enemy began sweating, terrified, saying it was impossible. Bing prepared to attack from behind, shouting at Yi not to retreat just because the kid was the patriarch's son. Yi also charged forward, warning that he would use his full strength, and the two attacked together, saying there was no way Xiu Xian could escape this time. However, the protagonist simply stepped back, and in the blink of an eye, their attacks collided with each other, throwing them off balance. Taking advantage of the opening, Zhan punched Bing, sending him flying, then kicked Yi in his most sensitive spot, dropping him to his knees, trembling in pain. After a brief beating, the three, humiliated, staggered back and warned him that next time would be different. Jifeng rushed to him, still in shock, asking if that was really Xiu Xian. She said she couldn't believe what she'd seen, since all three of them were cultivators at the entry level of Wujing. It should have been impossible for someone without awakened spiritual roots to defeat them. Yet his movements had clearly surpassed that level. Puzzled, she kept asking how he'd gained such strength in a single day, until she remembered their earlier conversation, when he'd asked her to become his disciple. Slowly, the pieces began to fit together in her mind. Astonished, Qifeng knelt before him, calling him master, apologizing for having been ignorant and disrespectful, and for bothering him both in the manner and again today when she asked for help. Xiu Xian sighed, reached out his hand, and told her to stand up, saying there was no need for that. After all, she had been the first person to help him in the manner. The two began walking together, and he asked if what she meant was that people without spiritual roots could never awaken them in their lifetime. Qifeng replied that, at least according to all recorded history of the Long Yuan nation, such a thing had never happened. But that day, he had just broken an iron rule. If the manor discovered that the hopeless waste, about to turn 20 without even having a wife, had awakened his spiritual roots, everyone's attitude toward him would completely change. Jian was confused, unsure whether that was meant as a compliment or an insult. As they re-entered the manor, he heard Qifeng shouting for the butler to stop. Zhang, still angry, kept yelling, asking if she was feeling pain now, saying she should have thought about that before causing trouble, and that just because the madam praised her cooking didn't mean he, the butler, couldn't discipline her. He ranted furiously that she had stirred up conflict with the second young master's servants. The protagonist grabbed his hand and squeezed hard, demanding to know who gave him permission to intimidate his disciple. The butler screamed in pain, saying his wrist was about to snap, and begging young Master Xian to stop. Suddenly, another voice interrupted, demanding to know how he dared to do such a thing, reminding him that he had already caused trouble outside and now was striking the butler. It was the manor's second lady, Liu Shi. Staying calm, the protagonist asked if she could be more reasonable. Outside, the servants had tried to bully the girl, and now the butler was doing the same, while all he'd done was hold the man's hand lightly. So what was the problem? Shai, irritated, said it seemed Jian was very bold today, daring to cause trouble and even talk back to her. Soon, another voice joined in, telling his mother not to waste time and to expel Jian from the manor immediately. It was the second young master, Ye Ba, who declared that having such a useless person living there had always been a disgrace to the Ye family. And now, after injuring the servants, he deserved nothing but to be cast out. Shur, however, said that wasn't how they would handle it. She decreed that both their wages would be deducted for 3 months and left the rest of the decision for when the family had returned. The butler, clutching his arm in pain, thought Jian could consider himself lucky, wondering since when that weakling, who once could barely lift anything, had become so strong. Inside another room, Ye Ba complained to his mother that they couldn't just let them off and asked since when they allowed anyone to trample over them like that. He mentioned that the beaten servants claimed the brat had suddenly become good at fighting, which could mean he'd awakened his spiritual roots. If that were true, once the family had found out, the entire power balance within the manor could shift. Sharj coldly replied that she already knew all that and told him not to worry. It was impossible for that trash to awaken spiritual roots overnight. At best, he might have secretly learned a few basic refining techniques and caught some servants off guard, nothing more. Annoyed, she added that they had planned the incident when he fell into the water last time, but somehow he survived. From that day on, she ordered her son to assign someone to watch him closely. She wanted to find out what tricks he was using, and even if they couldn't expel him directly, if something happened to him outside the manor, they could easily make it look like an accident. The next morning, several people gathered outside the kitchen. Another servant arrived and asked what was going on, and they replied that the girl inside had claimed she would handle all the manor's meals herself, something they found outrageously arrogant. Inside, Shifeng held 2 knives, focusing all her energy as she prepared. Then, incredibly fast strikes began slicing through everything around her with absurd precision, as if she were a seasoned swordmaster. The servants outside were terrified, asking what kind of killing intent she was giving off and whether this was really just cooking. Because if she kept it up, they feared they might end up being served for dinner themselves. Meanwhile, the protagonist was lying down when the system notified him that his disciple, Qifeng, had advanced to apprentice level. With that, he reached the great completion of Wu Jing, and his experience points began rising much faster than before, increasing at a remarkable pace. The system continued to announce that he had reached the main level and that the disciple slots had been expanded, allowing him to recruit 1 more person. In addition, a new skill was unlocked, Iron Stomach Consumption, which allows him to digest additional attributes or abilities, with a cooldown time of 1 hour. Impressed, Jian stood up and remarked that he had just undergone a major breakthrough, and it was incredible. But the most surprising part was the Iron Stomach skill, since it meant that if he ate something, he could absorb its attributes and abilities. Excited, he left and went to a shop. The owner greeted him, surprised to see him there, and asked what a young man like him was doing in such a humble place. The protagonist replied coldly that he wanted the most powerful technique they had. The shopkeeper stared at him, confused, saying that the weakling must be a martial arts failure and perhaps still suffering from the after-effects of his last fall into the water. The owner then turned and called for Liu Yunshu, a 17-year-old girl with Wu Jing cultivation, asking her to teach the boy a basic beginner's technique. Yunshu placed a simple manual on the table, and Jian, irritated, said he had asked for the most powerful technique, not one for children. She looked him straight in the eye and said he should consider himself lucky if he could master that basic technique within 5 years. Xian then dropped a pile of money onto the table. The shopkeeper's eyes gleamed with greed, and he hurriedly scolded Yunshu, asking if that was how she talked to the young master, ordering her to bring out the strongest technique immediately. Reluctantly, Yunshu went to the shelf and took out an advanced manual, scoffing that in all her years she had never seen anyone so ambitious yet so incompetent. Handing him the technique, she said that if he managed to master it before dying, he could come find her while she was still alive, since that was a technique from an entire cultivation realm. Mocking him, she added that she was going to take a break to wash her hair in the street. Jian pointed at her and said she had just given her word, and even the shopkeeper had heard it. Yunshu confirmed, saying she would stand by what she said for the rest of her life. Without hesitation, the protagonist unrolled the manual and said they didn't have to wait. He could settle this immediately. He opened his mouth and began to eat the technique. Both of them were dumbfounded, unable to comprehend what he thought he was doing. When he finished, the shopkeeper's eyes widened in shock. He had actually swallowed the manual. Jian gave a thumbs up, chuckled, then crouched down, trembling, saying it felt a bit uncomfortable. Suddenly, a massive surge of energy exploded from his body, unleashing a devastating pressure that threw the entire shop into chaos. The power kept rising to absurd levels, and overwhelmed by it, he dashed off at unbelievable speed, streaking across the city like lightning. In just a few seconds, he had crossed the entire district and returned to the shop. The stunned shopkeeper said what he had just witnessed was harder to believe than watching his ancestors rise from their graves, because for someone without spiritual roots to master a realm-level technique, that required both chi and body refinement was impossible. It could only mean one thing. Perhaps that young man was a true prodigy. Yunshu, exhausted, just sighed and said she gave up. The shopkeeper grew angry, saying Yunshu shouldn't act that way, that it wasn't right. She told him to let go, but by now a crowd had gathered, curious about the commotion, whispering that apparently she had lost some kind of bet. The wager had been that the protagonist couldn't learn a realm-level technique, and losing meant he actually had. The onlookers confirmed that he really had mastered the technique in an instant, though they still found it impossible to believe. Jian stepped forward and told them to stop, looking at Yunshu and asking if she had any special talents or hobbies. The girl found the question odd. It came out of nowhere. But still, they moved to a quieter corner where she admitted she wasn't a martial artist but enjoyed writing and painting a little. Jian smiled and said that was fine, asking if she would like to become his disciple, promising that if she accepted, the wager would be forgotten. Yunshu agreed, still confused, and asked if he planned to teach her martial arts. The protagonist started walking away, saying all she needed to do was focus on writing and painting. The girl watched him go, thinking her new master was rather strange. As he walked, the system notified him that another disciple had been successfully recruited. Liu Yunshu, Wu Jing level, specialties in calligraphy and painting. Holding a few more techniques in his hands, Xian muttered that he'd already devoured several books, but the cooldown on Iron Stomach was far too long, and it'd be great if it were shorter. He then ate another book, but before he could finish digesting it, a beast suddenly attacked, slamming into the ground with a violent impact. Not far away, two people were secretly watching. Chen Xiu remarked that the boy Ye Ba had mentioned was truly weak. He went down with a single blow and even caused him to break the rules by releasing a low-level demon. Ye Ba told him not to worry, promising a generous reward later. Chen Xiu, however, asked how they would explain what happened when they returned. Ye Ba said that demon wasn't even registered and they could simply claim it went berserk. Even if Chen Xiu had arrived in time to kill it, the protagonist would already be dead. Chen Xiu, a warden of the Demon Suppression Division, was at the great completion stage of Wu Jing. Suddenly, a voice spoke from behind them. "Who's dead?" Both men flinched and turned quickly, seeing the protagonist standing there unharmed. Chen Xiu was stunned. This boy had survived a direct attack from a demon at the small Wu Jing realm and had managed to approach them silently from behind, something that would take decades to master. He asked Ye Ba if he was certain that boy had no spiritual roots, because what he had just witnessed was impossible for a mere mortal. Jian, irritated, asked if Ye Ba had been involved in the drowning incident, and if he was now trying to finish the job. The protagonist stared coldly at the second young master and asked if he was actually seeking death. Ye Ba began trembling and asked Chen Xiu what happened to the demon and why it had stopped attacking. Chen Xiu pointed ahead, and when Ye Ba looked, he saw the demon already lying dead, its head severed beside its body. Shocked, he asked how the creature had been killed with a single strike. Chen Xiu immediately moved forward, saying he'd have to deal with the protagonist himself. Jian easily dodged and remarked that the man seemed to be at a high realm, so defeating him should yield plenty of experience. Chen Xiu kept attacking relentlessly, shouting that the boy must be delusional, because even if he had awakened recently, it would take decades of training to reach that level. But in any case, he wouldn't live long enough to find out. Jian blocked the blows effortlessly and countered with a punch to Chen Xiu's face, sending him flying several meters away. Trembling, Chen Xiu wondered how the protagonist could have such a solid martial foundation, realizing Ye Ba had lied to him. A level of skill like that took decades, not mere weeks after awakening. Jian watched Chen Xiu shivering on the ground and slowly approached, saying that apparently the books he had eaten were quite useful since his movements had come naturally during the fight. Desperate, Chen Xiu looked back and thought he couldn't defeat that monster. He needed to flee immediately. Focusing his energy, he activated his lightness technique and shot off at incredible speed, quickly widening the distance. Looking back and seeing Xian still standing still, he believed he had escaped, thinking that even if the boy was fast, he couldn't catch up now. Suddenly, Xian appeared right beside him, arms crossed, asking where he thought he was going. Paralyzed with fear, Chen Xiu stammered that it was impossible. The protagonist then grabbed his head and slammed it into the ground with terrifying force. Chen Xiu thought that blow was too much, and, powerless, began begging for his life, calling Jian young hero, and insisting he was only a government officer, warning that if he killed him, he'd face serious consequences. Jian seemed surprised and said that made sense, admitting that Chen Xiu did look like a decent person. But in the blink of an eye, he vanished and reappeared in front of him. Chen Xiu, stunned, asked if those claws in Jian's hands were the same ones he had taken from the demon, and tried to reason with him, saying he was only warning him for his own good. If Jian killed him, the fallout would be disastrous. With a dark glare, Jian replied that Chen Xiu called himself an official, but had conspired with that dog, Ye Ba, committed murder, and released a man-eating demon, so he deserved to die. He added that Chen Siyu and Ye Ba had planned everything, and now he only had to say that the demon killed him while he happened to be passing by, heard the screams, and slew the creature, so Chen Siyu should thank him even in death. Chen Siyu tried to plead again, but it was already too late. Back at the manor, Ye Ba muttered that if he had sensed something wrong, he would have fled long ago. Suddenly, he saw the protagonist passing by the window and froze in terror at Jian's gaze. Shi noticed and remarked that if her son hadn't been lazy all his life and had properly cultivated after stealing the protagonist's spiritual roots, he would at least be at the second realm by now, and they wouldn't be trembling in fear of that trash. Ye Ba told his mother not to worry. He had already reported Xian to the authorities, and soon the government would accuse him of murder. His mother, however, warned him not to count on that, saying he had been deceived. She had already spoken with the coroner from the Demon Suppression Division, who confirmed that Chen Siyu's corpse was covered in claw marks, making it appear he'd been killed by a demon. Shi emphasized that it was now certain Jian had awakened his spiritual roots and possessed extraordinary talent, so they needed to stop coming up with foolish plans and find a way to eliminate him before his power surpassed even the strongest guard in the prefecture. Until then, Ye Ba was to keep a close watch on him. Outside, a man observed Jian sitting with his fishing rod. The protagonist placed a few fish into a small basin of water, remarking that the system only said fishing granted experience. It never specified where the fish had to come from. So if he bought fish from the market and then fished them again, it should still work. He hooked one of the fish and grinned when he saw that it did, in fact, work. He gained 4 experience points. The spy ran back to the manor and reported that every day Xian bought fish from the market and fished them out of his own basin. When asked if he had seen any secret training, the servant replied no. Xian spent the entire day buying and fishing, never out of sight even once. Furious, Ye Ba demanded to know what that brat was scheming, wondering why his own progress stalled despite constant training, while Xian advanced rapidly doing nothing. The only logical explanation, he said, was that the boy was cheating and needed to be exposed. The system then notified Xian that his fishing skill had risen to apprentice level, giving him a chance to catch fish with special attributes. However, his current location no longer provided experience or level ups, so he needed to find a higher level fishing spot. Puzzled, Xian wondered what kind of place could be considered high level for fishing. Suddenly, a servant approached and said he had received a letter. Surprised, Xian wondered who could be writing to him, joking that maybe it was from a secret admirer. Opening it, he saw it was an invitation to the selection trials of the Demon Suppression Division. He thought the timing was perfect. After all, the division's director had just been eliminated by his own hands, and even without proof, everyone there would surely despise him. It was hard not to connect this to Ye Ba and his mother, but still, it was a valuable opportunity handed to him, and he had no reason to refuse. Sitting with Qifeng, she mentioned that the Demon Suppression Division's selection was approaching, and asked why he still looked so calm. She pointed out that participating was a huge opportunity, so she didn't understand why he didn't seem excited. He told her to think carefully about what she was saying. Given his background and status in the family, did she really believe anything good could happen to him? When something seems too good to be true, he said, it usually is. Jifeng admitted he was probably right again, but noted that, like before, he was pointing and talking to himself, and asked what he was doing. The protagonist explained that he had no idea what kinds of opponents he would face in the division's selection, so he needed to prepare completely. The system suddenly announced, Ye Qifeng's cooking has advanced. Spiritual root unlocked. Special talent unlocked. Exotic cuisine requires instruction. The skill description stated that once taught, Qifeng would be able to infuse spiritual energy into her dishes, granting special buffs such as increased attack, defense, speed, or perception to those who ate them. As she advanced, she could create even stronger dishes using rare ingredients. Jian wondered how to teach her that ability until something appeared above his head. He caught it with his fingers, guessing it might be a skill point that needed to be transferred. Unsure what to do, he decided to try and gently touch her forehead. The system announced that the exotic cuisine skill had been successfully taught. Embarrassed, Qifeng looked away and asked why her master had just touched her forehead. Suddenly, she began to feel a strange power coursing through her, her eyes and body radiating energy she had never experienced before. The system continued. Recipe learned, spirit braised beef tendon. Recipe learned, spirit grilled vinegar fish. Recipe learned, supreme spirit hot pot. Overwhelmed, Xifeng jumped up and ran off, saying that all the recipes had flooded into her mind at once, and she had to start cooking before she forgot them. The system then announced, Disciple Liu Yunshu has advanced to apprentice level. Special skill unlocked, scroll creation. Yunshu can now craft scrolls with special effects. Scroll of Disguise unlocked. Use this scroll to blend into your surroundings. Xian noticed that all his disciples were working hard when another notification appeared. A subsystem had been unlocked, allowing disciples to store their creations in their own inventories, which he could access anytime. He gathered both disciples and told them he would be away for a while, but they should continue their tasks. Qifang waved goodbye, asking him to be careful on the road, while Yunshu asked why their master had left empty-handed since they had prepared supplies for him. Qifang explained that the master said he'd stored everything in some kind of thin barrel, and that they could also store their future creations there. She added that she honestly didn't understand him. He was a rather strange person. Sometime later, at the entrance to the Demon Suppression Division, the guards asked Jian to show his letter of recommendation. After reading it, the guard looked shocked and furious, asking if he really was Jian. The protagonist confirmed and immediately felt a surge of killing intent. All the guards surrounded him, filled with rage, shouting that this was the brat who killed Chen Xiu, the illegitimate son of the Ye family, and that for daring to slay a fellow comrade, he could not be allowed to live. He must be executed immediately. Jian thought this must be another lie spread by Ye Ba and his mother. And even if the division had no proof, he was now everyone's enemy. Their plan had clearly worked. Suddenly someone shouted, announcing the arrival of young Master Lian. Curious, Xian asked who that was. And another man, Wu Chenggen, 18 years old and already in an advanced realm, stepped forward to explain. He said the newcomer was young Master Lian of the Lian family, a genius who had trained for far less time than most, yet reached such a realm at only 16. Xian pointed at Chenggen, saying he was like those explainers every story had. Chenggen frowned, asking what an explainer was. Young Master Lian began to speak, saying that the Lian family's reputation was, when suddenly someone pushed him aside, telling him to move. The protagonist asked who that person was, and Chenggen explained it was young Master Qian. Last year, he had been the most outstanding among the new recruits of the single realm, even managing to slay a great demon and seize its spiritual core. Lion clenched his fists in frustration, but knew better than to start a fight. Qian arrogantly said these brats thought too highly of themselves, but when he shattered another great demon's core this year, he'd advanced to the second realm, and he was already very close. Suddenly, another person appeared behind Qian, a towering, ogre-like figure who told him to get out of the way. Qian turned around, terrified, and quickly stepped aside without a word. Xian asked who this giant was, since even the arrogant Qian backed down. Chenggen explained that he came from the famous Northern Giant Spirit Mansion. They were all tall and immensely strong. That man was their most promising disciple in the last decade, one of the few newcomers capable of reaching the second realm. Last year, he had been unstoppable in the two-realm demon cavern. Then the guards suddenly announced the arrival of Lady Zhao. The giant began trembling in fear, asking if that terrifying aura was from a great demon. Everyone around began to feel the suffocating pressure. It was so overwhelming that some considered fleeing. The presence came from the White Tiger, a great demon of the third realm. Zhao Yuhui, heiress of the demonic domination bloodline of the Zhao family, was the current bearer of this creature. People started screaming for everyone to run, shouting that a great demon was here. The giant, frozen in fear, couldn't move. The White Tiger approached, staring directly into his eyes. The young man almost fainted, but the tiger simply ignored him and continued walking. The giant collapsed onto the ground, pale and trembling from sheer terror. The protagonist watched, thinking that the small tiger demon he had fought before was nothing compared to this living mountain. The great demon White Tiger was furious. It could wipe out every newcomer there, and even the guards would suffer heavy casualties. Jian asked Chenggen who this Zhao lady was, capable of taming such a terrifying demonic beast. Chenggen explained that the southern Zhao family was known for its unique bloodline, the spiritual blood of demonic domination, which allowed them to control nearly any rare beast in existence. They said the Zhao family's patriarch could even ride a phoenix and cross demon caverns with ease. Rumor had it that the family's bloodline had weakened over the last century, but this lady had perfectly inherited its power and become an unparalleled genius. Now she was universally acknowledged and destined to be the next Grand Master of the Ten Realms. Chenggen even joked that if someone like him could marry her, he would wake up laughing every day. After the explanation, the two entered the site, and the protagonist was astonished by how many people were there. Among countless statues of various shapes and sizes, Chenggen explained that each one possessed divine power and served to keep the demons of the caverns at bay. Surprised, Jian asked if this was a world where humans, demons, and immortals coexisted. Chenggen asked what he meant by coexist, since the main conflict had always been between humans and demons. Immortals were exceedingly rare. The protagonist then asked which cavern he should enter, and Chenggen explained that typically one had to go to the chief officer to have their realm assessed. After that, they'd be assigned to a corresponding demon cavern. Those of the first realm would go to a one-realm cavern, while those of the second realm went to a two-realm one. Jian commented that from now on he would use the terms first realm, second realm, and third realm for simplicity. He asked if Lady Zhao was going to a second realm cavern, and Chenggen, surprised, said no. Apparently she was heading into a third realm cavern. Right after that, the system notified that the host had achieved a minor breakthrough. Qifeng had advanced to sous chef, and Yunshu had advanced to scholar. The crowd began murmuring in disbelief, wondering if the organizers were truly sending someone into a demon cavern above their own realm. Even for a genius, that was extremely risky. Another youth commented that most people didn't understand the true meaning of the Zhao family's bloodline, a lineage that appeared only once every century. With that complete inheritance, she could surpass normal limits and slay high-level demons directly, something only one newcomer per generation could achieve. Xian admitted that was truly impressive, and Chenggen remarked that there was no need to envy her, since they were still in the first realm and could only go to a first-realm demon cavern. Suddenly, someone shouted that Xian was also assigned to a third-realm demon cavern. Chenggen turned pale and told the officer there must be a mistake. Xian was in the first realm like him, and sending him into a third-realm cavern was equivalent to sentencing him to death. The officer, angered, drew his sword and shouted if Chenggen dared defy an order, any newcomer who disobeyed the Demon Suppression Division would be executed. The protagonist interrupted, asking his friend to stop and not make things worse. He would go to the Third Realm Cavern. Xian began walking toward the entrance, and the onlookers were stunned, whispering that never before had a First Realm novice been sent into a Third Realm Demon Cavern. It was clearly a death sentence. Many assumed he must have offended the division. Zhao Yuhui glanced at Xian and remarked that he was indeed bold. He knew the vast difference in power between them, yet dared to enter the same cavern. He ignored her and kept walking while she followed right behind, saying the division should at least send a death notice to his family. Inside the cavern, several monsters were speaking among themselves, saying they could clearly smell a human nearby, a weak one from the first realm. One of them ordered the lesser demons to start the hunt immediately. Meanwhile, Xian sat quietly, thinking that Yunshu's camouflage scroll was incredibly useful, even though demons had keen senses. As long as he kept changing positions, he could hide indefinitely. On top of that, Qifeng had prepared so much food infused with attribute boosts that he could barely eat it all. Xian noticed that each dish increased his stats, so he decided to push his attributes to the limit. 4 days later, his attack, defense, and spiritual energy had each risen by 50%. He concluded that this was probably the cap for now. Then the system appeared again, notifying that the host had advanced to the second realm. Qifeng had reached master chef status, now requiring higher quality ingredients to continue gaining culinary experience. And Yunshu had reached the academic level, now needing fine paper to progress in her studies. The protagonist concluded that his peaceful days of hiding were over. It was finally time to act on his own. However, he understood that he still couldn't fight, not while the lesser demons nearby were close to or had already reached the second realm. He picked up his fishing rod and began fishing calmly, planning to stay hidden until he had exhausted all the experience he could gain from this skill before making his move. Suddenly, a demon rat detected a human presence and lunged to attack, but its strike was blocked by another rat. The first one was stunned and demanded to know what Rat 3 was doing and why he was protecting a human. Yu Hui, who was using her ability to control Rat 3, only stared silently. The attacking rat began to suspect that this could be the legendary demon control bloodline, but before it could react, it was stabbed from behind. Rat 4 had also been taken over. Looking ahead, Yu Hui saw a large horde of demon rats and activated her ocular ability, the Dance of the Imperial Delight Massacre. Within moments, all the rats turned on each other in hatred, fighting to the death under her control. Minutes later, the ground was littered with corpses. She observed the carnage and remarked that dealing with first-realm demon rats was far too easy. She hadn't even needed to try. But then, a voice echoed from the darkness, asking if that was really all, saying it would be interesting to see how she fared against the blind rat brothers. In an instant, 2 massive rats emerged from the shadows and launched their assault. Yu Hui dodged their blows with precision, and one of them mocked her, asking what she thought of their skills. Smirking arrogantly, the girl said the timing was perfect and activated her ocular ability again. But the rats laughed, taunting that her trick wouldn't work on them since they were blind. One lunged forward and grabbed her head, sneering, asking if this was truly the heiress of that 1 in a million bloodline. She didn't seem impressive at all. He turned to his brother and asked what he thought of her. But Yu Hui began to chuckle softly. The rat asked what was so funny. She asked if he really thought she was dead. Confused, the rat sniffed the air and then realization struck. He had fallen into an illusion. The head he was holding wasn't Yu Hui's. It was his brother's. Horrified, the blind rat screamed in disbelief, unable to accept that he had killed his own kin. Yu Hui approached calmly, asking why he thought being blind made him immune to her control. He had gravely underestimated the thousand-year Zhao bloodline, capable of bending any demonic creature to its will. Consumed by rage and guilt, the surviving blind rat roared and charged at her, vowing to finish what he started. He unleashed a flurry of strikes, shouting that no matter her bloodline, if he was fast enough, he could still tear her to pieces. Yu Hui laughed again and told him she had already warned him. It was useless. In the next instant, the rat that had launched countless attacks was abruptly shredded apart, his body sliced into innumerable fragments in a single second. Yu Hui kept walking until she reached a lake. There, she finally found what she'd been looking for. The Wolf Lord, a third-realm demon leader, seated calmly on his throne. He asked if she was truly the one who had eliminated his subordinates, those two first-realm demons from the Fang tribe, and remarked that the title of once-in-a-century genius seemed well-deserved. However, he said that wasn't what the division had told him, because the orders he received from the Demon Suppression Division were to kill a man. Shocked and with tears in her eyes, Yu Hui asked herself if the division had really given such an order. She never imagined they would go that far, conspiring with a demon. The Wolf Lord drew his weapon, enveloping it in water and shaping the tip into a spear, saying it was time to stop talking, since killing was killing either way. He stood up and began walking toward her, stating that he wanted to see for himself what kind of genius appeared once in a century and what she was truly capable of. Yu Hui pulled down her blindfold and asked if he really didn't know she excelled at eliminating high-level demons, warning him that within minutes he'd be on his knees calling her queen. The Wolf Lord readied his strike and asked if she was serious. Yu Hui summoned a giant turtle to block the blow, but the Wolf Lord's power was so overwhelming that his spear pierced straight through the shell with ease. The tip grazed her neck, leaving a shallow cut and a suffocating aura of pressure. Terrified, she retreated as fast as she could, realizing that if not for the automatic activation of the substitute death demon's curse, she would already be dead. She also noticed, horrified, that her demonic spiritual energy wasn't functioning properly. Seeing the situation was far from what she expected, Yu Hui tore off her blindfold completely and summoned the Great White Tiger, a high-level demon, which immediately lunged to attack. The Wolf Lord dodged and, impressed, commented that most second-realm cultivators would have died instantly, yet she managed to summon such a creature. Ignoring the tiger, he dashed straight toward Yu Hui, declaring that if he killed her, the battle would end, so there was no point wasting time on the beast. Yu Hui tried once more to use her ocular ability, commanding him to stop, but the Wolf Lord was unaffected and kept advancing. Desperate and crying, she couldn't understand why her powers didn't work there. The Wolf Lord struck, but the tiger intervened to shield its master. The clash was so violent that Yu Hui couldn't even see. The two beasts exchanged blows at incredible speed. The Wolf Lord commented that even in his lunar form, he could still keep up with the tiger's movements, proof of how exceptional it was. Of all non-leader demons he had faced, that tiger was the strongest. Their battle grew more and more insane, their movements blurring together as they clashed, yet the tiger defended itself perfectly. The Wolf Lord then stepped back, eyes blazing, saying the warm-up was over. It was time to fight seriously. He unleashed his technique, Serpent Shadow Blade and Spear, making his attacks flexible and lightning fast. The tiger held out for a few seconds, but then its body froze. The Wolf Lord laughed. The tiger was completely ensnared by twisting serpentine spears. With a single command to die, the great demon was torn to shreds. Yu Hui's heart sank. She turned and fled, her thoughts racing. It was shameful. She, from such a prestigious family, a genius born once in a century, had fallen so low that she could only run. Even if she had another chance, it would be pointless. She couldn't defeat him. Her bloodline, capable of controlling demons, meant nothing against a being like that. Even her strongest summon, the Great White Tiger, had been destroyed, making any weaker summons completely useless. Suddenly, the Wolf Lord appeared in front of her, asking where she thought she was going and mockingly reminding her that she was the one who'd said he'd be on his knees calling her queen. He then ordered her to prepare to die and thrust his spear straight toward her. But something unexpected happened. A figure appeared in front of her and snapped the spear's tip clean off. Stunned, the Wolf Lord stared at the figure and asked if that wasn't the iron-scaled fish he had stationed to guard the western cavern entrance. Then he looked to the side and asked if another expert was present. From the shadows, the protagonist, now just a humble fisherman, approached calmly. Moments later, outside the cavern, a crowd was anxiously waiting to see the outcome. They noticed movement as the cavern began to tremble. And then Yu Hui emerged from within, alive. The onlookers were astonished, murmuring that she truly was a genius. A high-level demon cavern had posed no challenge to her at all. They added that the only First Realm cultivator who had entered alongside her was surely dead by now, since a two-realm gap was simply impossible to overcome. Then they recognized the boy walking beside her, Xian, of the Ya family, the one known to have no spiritual roots so weak that even a chicken could peck him to death. The guards burst out laughing, and one praised his captain for the brilliant plan of borrowing a knife to kill, letting Lady Zhao do the job for them. The captain smirked, saying it had been obvious. That brat had offended the Demon Suppression Division, and therefore couldn't be allowed to live. He boasted that he had more than 100 ways to get rid of him. Suddenly, Yu Hui bowed before everyone and declared, "I, Zhao Yu Hui, disciple of the Zhao sect, welcome my master Xian on his triumphant return." The captain froze in utter confusion, demanding to know what that was supposed to mean. Why would someone as arrogant as her kneel? And worse, why call that useless boy master? He laughed, saying it was absurd to hear something so ridiculous from a noble of the Zhao family. But then another guard began trembling, telling his captain to look ahead. An enormous, terrifying aura was emanating from the demon cavern. Panic spread as people wondered if a great demon was breaking through the seal. Then the Wolf Lord emerged from the entrance, paralyzing everyone with fear. The captain, pale, screamed that it was Ruyi, the Wolf Lord, a third realm demon leader, and ordered everyone to run and call for reinforcements immediately. At that moment, Xian stepped out wearing the Wolf Lord's severed head, as if it were a helmet, apologizing calmly, and saying he had forgotten to take off his helmet before leaving. Yu Hui remained kneeling before him, asking, with emotion and respect, when she could begin her training under her new master. The guards were utterly dumbfounded, unable to believe their ears. The prodigy who appeared once a century was calling that failure her teacher. The other participants were just as shocked, unable to comprehend how someone from the First Realm had come out alive from a cavern filled with Third Realm demons. The captain trembled, asking himself what on earth was happening. Everything before his eyes defied common sense, yet it was real. Furious, he thought that the boy must have used some dark sorcery to make Lady Zhao ensure his safety. Enraged by what he considered a disgrace, a noble girl humiliating herself to call that trash master, he reached for his sword. 1 hour earlier, inside the cavern, Jian and Ru Yi had been clashing evenly. Yu Hui couldn't believe what she was witnessing. Was that boy really in the First Realm? His strikes, speed, and movement matched those of a Third Realm demon lord. The Wolf Lord admitted that Jian was indeed remarkable and possessed inexplicable abilities, saying that the division had told him Jian was only First Realm, but now he couldn't believe it. Even if he were beaten to death, he wanted to unleash his ultimate move. His spears began to twist like serpents, striking at Jian. Yu Hui recognized the same technique that had defeated her great white tiger. Even among Third Realm demons, being hit by that move meant certain death. Ru Yi was stunned when his attack was blocked again. He realized Xian was using the turtle shell of his own subordinate to counter the same ultimate strike. Xian then burst forward with incredible speed, emerging from behind the shell to launch a direct attack. The Wolf Lord managed to defend himself, but the force of the blow was tremendous. Ru Yi praised Xian, saying he had done well. He had truly blocked the ultimate move and was the first novice ever to fight a Third Realm Lord to a draw. Xian frowned and asked what he was talking about. Who said they were equals? He snapped that he hadn't spent 7 days hiding just to come out and be seen as equal. Then he unleashed his full power, energy erupting like a storm around him. The Wolf Lord could barely withstand the overwhelming pressure. The cavern shook as Jian's aura tore through the air. Ru Yi gritted his teeth, unable to contain the terrifying force behind Xian's blade, wondering how this was possible. At best, the boy's cultivation was equal to his own, so how could he overpower him so completely? Xian, now at 50% increased attack, 50% defense, and 50% spiritual energy, pressed forward to end the fight. Xian remarked that he was now completely buffed. Desperate, Ru Yi tried one last move, launching another furious strike. But Xian read his motion instantly, blocked it, and shattered both his own sword and the Wolf Lord's spear in the collision. Tossing aside the broken blade, he said he'd settle it the old-fashioned way, driving his fist forward with such force that the lake split in half and the Wolf Lord was blasted backwards, slamming into the cavern wall and leaving a massive crater. Trembling, Ru Yi stammered, asking who he really was. It was impossible for a novice to defeat him. The protagonist stepped forward and delivered the final blow, saying calmly that he was nothing more than an ordinary fisherman. The Wolf Lord's head rolled to Yu Hui's feet, but to her shock, the wolf head was only a mask. Jian pointed his staff toward the figure that had been pretending to be a monster and asked if he was human. Pinned against the wall, the man froze as Jian demanded to know why he had been masquerading as a demon inside the cavern. The man explained that he had once been an officer from the division, but obsessed with cultivation, He had stolen a secret technique from the library. Since then, he had been forced to hide in the demon caverns, disguising himself as a high-level demon to escape capture. Jian asked what the technique was and ordered him to hand it over immediately. The man began radiating dark energy and said he was already near death, so he would pass everything on to Jian. He confessed that he had practiced it for 5 years without making any progress, but perhaps Jian could achieve results after the same amount of time. Moments later, his body disintegrated before their eyes, fading into nothing. The system appeared. Item obtained: Wolf Lord's staff, an ordinary staff, but can also be used to hit people on the head. Then another notification followed. New cultivation technique acquired: Art of Transformation. This technique is extremely difficult to master, but once cultivated, it allows the user to take on multiple forms. The higher the realm, the more forms can be assumed, making it nearly impossible for enemies to see through disguises. Another skill unlocked, Disciple Summoning, allows the host to summon any disciple instantly from anywhere with a 1-hour cooldown. A second spell followed, Reception, granting the ability to anticipate and counter a portion of attacks and spells from enemies whose realm is not superior to his. Yuhui approached and asked why he even wanted that technique, explaining that the Art of Transformation was an elite-level skill meant for cultivators of the 4th realm. She warned that even if Xian had been lucky enough to defeat a 3rd realm demon lord, that art was far beyond his level. If his cultivation wasn't strong enough, he could waste years without progress, or worse, lose his mind and destroy his cultivation completely. Xian ignored every word she said and swallowed the scroll whole. Yu Hui screamed in shock, asking if he had lost his mind. Xian began staring intently at her, examining every detail of her figure. Feeling uneasy, Yu Hui thought he was looking at her with impure intentions. But after a few seconds, Xian focused and activated his new technique, perfectly transforming into her. Yu Hui stood frozen, utterly speechless. In the blink of an eye, he had mastered the Art of Transformation. Jian walked up to her, saying he had successfully taken her form, though he noted he seemed a bit taller, and when he touched his chest, he joked that part of it seemed smaller than expected. Furious, Yu Hui smacked his hand away, shouting at him to stop touching things and yelling that his ugly face didn't suit her appearance at all. Jian touched his own cheek and said that due to a lapse in focus, his spiritual energy had reacted on its own, revealing part of his true face. Then he brushed it off, saying it didn't matter, and asked if she truly could control demons. Yu Hui confirmed, explaining that her family had a century-old tradition of demon control. Curious, Xian asked if she'd be interested in becoming his disciple. Yu Hui cut him off sharply, telling him to stop daydreaming. Even if he had saved her, her family was revered by thousands in the south, and she would never let him take advantage of that. Turning away, she said they should leave quickly. Spending too long inside a demon cavern would damage her family's reputation. Jian casually asked if she wanted to summon a phoenix. Yu Hui froze mid-step, her voice shifting instantly in surprise. Before entering the cavern, the protagonist had asked whether the Zhao family still wasn't satisfied with such a prodigy. Chenggen had explained that it was true. The family patriarch had enormous expectations for Yu Hui, hoping she could control a phoenix by the time she turned 20. However, to control a phoenix, one had to reach at least the 10th realm. And with only 2 years left, going from the 3rd to the 10th realm in that short time was considered impossible. Inside the cavern, Yu Hui asked if the protagonist truly knew what he was saying, because even if he had mastered the Art of Transformation in an instant, summoning a phoenix was not something to speak of so lightly. She explained that there were 3 indispensable conditions. First, perfectly inheriting the Zhao family's bloodline. Second, reaching the 10th realm. And third, finding and defeating the phoenix in the immortal realm. Xian answered casually, saying she didn't need to go through all that. All she had to do was become his disciple. That way, he would help her raise a phoenix chick, making her its rightful master automatically. Yu Hui was both shocked and furious at the audacity of his words, but Jian continued, saying it was basically impossible for her to achieve that alone within 2 years. On the other hand, if she joined him, she'd actually have a chance. She fell silent, thinking. Jian had reached the 3rd realm in only 7 days, while she had taken 14 years to reach the 2nd realm since childhood. The Art of Transformation was a technique that even 10th realm masters struggled to grasp, and he had simply learned it by swallowing the scroll. Everything she had seen so far defied logic, and Yu Hui began to wonder if this man was truly ordinary. Maybe it was worth the risk. Back in the present, outside the demon cavern, Yu Hui mounted one of her beasts and bowed, saying farewell to her master. She would return home to report the situation and then begin cultivating what he had taught her. The protagonist waved her off, telling her to go ahead, since the phoenix was calling for her. The system appeared again. Host has reached entry level of the 3rd realm. New disciple Zhao Yu Hui has joined. 2nd realm, bearer of the demon controller bloodline. Disciple level. Apprentice. Specialty, taming. Zhao Yuhui can tame ordinary animals and turn them into demonic beasts. The higher her specialty level, the stronger the beast she creates. Meanwhile, in the Ye family mansion, the second young master raged, shouting that it was over. That worthless brat had survived again. He demanded to know how someone from the first realm could have survived inside a third realm demon cavern. Ye Ba wondered if the girl from the Zhao family had protected him, but quickly dismissed the thought, remembering that the previous year his father had asked for Yu Hui's hand in marriage, and the Zhao family had refused. There was no way she would be interested in that useless trash. His mother yelled, asking why he was panicking. Even if the boy had really reached the third realm, at best he was equal to the mansion guards. Jian must be insane to fight within the estate and risk drawing the attention of the government and the demon division. If that happened, he'd be executed on the spot. Ye Ba protested that they couldn't just sit and wait. Shi replied that there was a way. She would get poison from the family alchemist and mix it into his food. Once he was dead, they'd toss the body to the worms. She admitted she never thought it would come to this, but that boy was proving hard to kill. Disturbed, Ye Ba agreed, saying it was a clean and quiet plan. And before the protagonist died, they should drag the cook to him and make him watch his lover executed before his eyes. Suddenly, a fly landed on Shai's neck. She tried to swat it away, but too late. It bit her, instantly swelling and draining her life force completely, leaving her body an empty husk. The creature then darted toward Ye Ba, who screamed for help in terror. Later, a few townsfolk gathered near a tree, staring at a sign. One asked what it said, and another explained they'd heard Shai and Ye Ba were attacked by a mosquito demon inside the mansion, resulting in 3 deaths, including those of the guards. Now the entire city was hunting the creature. They also whispered that the illegitimate son of the Ye family had recently joined the demon suppression division and narrowly escaped. Lucky that he'd been on a mission, because otherwise he might have been killed by a demon strong enough to defeat a third realm guard. Yunshu, listening nearby, overheard them saying they never imagined that the family's illegitimate son would enter the division and even rise to such a high position. And that's not even all. The eldest daughter of the southern Zhao family publicly called him Master. Upon hearing everything, Yunshu quickly wrote to her master reporting that rumors about the Ye family incident were spreading throughout the city. The system notified, Yunshu has acquired the virtuous calligraphy skill and unlocked a new spell, Flying Transmission. Now the protagonist and his disciples could communicate remotely by writing on a flying transmission scroll created by Yunshu. Another spell, Depict and Decipher, allowed her to draw objects and analyze the magic contained in scrolls. Sitting on a tree branch, Xian simply told her to ignore the rumors and asked if the spiritual bamboos she had brought from the demonic cave would be enough. She replied that paper made from spiritual bamboo was much better to use and that she still had plenty, but noted that the usual practice methods no longer seemed to have any effect. Drawing chickens, ducks, and fish from the courtyard wasn't improving her skills anymore. The system notified, assignable side quests, body art. Make Liu Yunshu complete representations of human or demonic body movements on scrolls. Fire stew. Teach Ye Qifang how to use fire spells for cooking. Experience could only be gained through these practices until the disciples advanced to the next title. The protagonist thought that none of his disciples had much combat experience, and sending them on missions alone would be dangerous. Therefore, he decided to integrate their training into his own tasks for now. Once again, the system's voice appeared announcing, Main Quest, Breathless Villagers. Investigate the mysterious happenings in Tyre Village. Villagers have been randomly paralyzed and died of exhaustion. Discover the cause and eliminate the culprit. Jian jumped from the tree, transforming into a bird, and soon arrived at the village. The guards at the entrance stopped him and asked what he was doing there. Jian showed his badge saying he was from the Demon Suppression Division and had come to investigate. The guard, upon seeing the symbol, apologized and let him in. As they walked, the guard explained that the villagers had started behaving strangely 7 days ago and suddenly froze in place, ceasing all movement as if possessed. He had tried using his own abilities but couldn't detect the caster, which meant the person responsible was probably of a higher level than him. Jian extended his hand and asked why they didn't just move the villagers away, but the guard cried out desperately for him not to do that, warning that touching the paralyzed people would cause whoever touched them to become paralyzed as well. He explained that even indirect contact, such as using sticks or throwing objects to knock them over, didn't work, since the victims remained frozen until they collapsed from exhaustion and died, only then releasing the spell. The guard led the protagonist to the village cemetery, saying that they had already called local cultivators, but all had been useless, and half of the villagers were already dead. If it continued like this, the whole village would be wiped out. He bowed and said he had told everything he knew, adding that if there were no further questions, He would leave the protagonist to investigate on his own. Jian said it was fine and asked him to step aside. He then began summoning his disciple Yunshu, who suddenly appeared right in front of him. Surprised and embarrassed, she complained that he should warn her before summoning her next time. If she had been bathing, it would have been terribly awkward. Jian, slightly embarrassed, said fine and pointed to the paralyzed villagers, saying they were probably under some kind of spell and asking if she could analyze it. Yunshu nodded, picked up her brush, and drew a magic circle on the ground, activating the technique Depict and Decipher. After a few seconds of concentration, she began writing in her book, saying she had figured it out. It was a body immobilization technique. The protagonist asked what that meant, and she explained that it was an advanced spell whose effect depended on the caster's level. The farther away the caster was, the weaker the spell became. Based on her analysis, the culprit was probably at the temple on top of the distant mountain. Jian started walking, saying it was time to meet this caster. Yunshu, worried, warned that if they went now, they might be suppressed by the enemy's higher level and asked why they couldn't level up first, using the fishing method the master always did before battles. The protagonist, a bit irritated, replied that this time he couldn't wait. Even if he had time, the villagers didn't. Then he transformed back into a bird and flew toward the temple. As he approached, he saw a man, a horned monk, Grand Master of the Third Realm. While sweeping the floor, the monk sensed someone's presence and used a skill to paralyze the bird, which fell to the ground and reverted to human form. The monk calmly greeted him, asking what brought such an esteemed guest to his humble temple. Jian went straight to the point, saying that the monk was responsible for harming the villagers and demanding that he undo the immobilization spell immediately. The monk smiled and claimed he was being falsely accused. Suddenly, his stats increased by 50%. The protagonist rushed forward in fury, shouting that the monk had just used the same immobilization spell. And if he wasn't the culprit, then who was? Since the monk was using the Copperhead iron body technique, his body had become as tough as steel, rendering the protagonist's attack useless. With a single move, the monk disarmed him. The two began exchanging physical blows. The monk attacked multiple times, but Jian blocked each strike with precision. Smiling, the monk remarked that Jian's martial arts were indeed impressive, and that judging by his mastery, he must have trained for decades. The protagonist stayed silent, trying to land another hit. The monk laughed, saying that mere martial arts wouldn't be enough to defeat him, then cast the freezing spell again. Suspended in midair, Jian realized he couldn't move. The monk charged a powerful strike and hurled him several meters away, slamming him into one of the temple's buildings. Yunshu appeared, worried, asking if he was all right. Jian replied that he was fine, and pointed out that the blow had been unavoidable. He explained that first, they needed to calculate the cooldown time of the monk's spell. Second, they had to buy time so he could copy the magic. Yunshu nodded, saying she'd try to reproduce the enemy's technique as quickly as possible and asked him to lure the monk into an open area. Jian then ate a turtle essence and mung bean recovery cake, commenting that the ingredients collected in the demonic cave last time had been enough for Qifeng to make 3, so this would have to do. The monk approached slowly, saying there was no need for Jian to suffer the pains of the mortal world any longer. Preparing to finish him off, he launched a precise strike, but suddenly the protagonist's body turned to stone. Shocked, the monk realized he had underestimated his opponent. It was a transformation technique. Before he could react, Jian was already behind him. The monk tried to counter, but the protagonist blocked the attack and grabbed his arm, saying that, as a monk, he shouldn't utter such profane words, then slammed him violently into the ground. The monk reactivated the Copperhead iron body technique to resist the impact, but the force was so immense it nearly destroyed the entire temple. Trying to escape, the monk leapt away, thinking that fortunately he had activated the iron body just in time. However, Jian appeared right in front of him and struck another devastating blow. The monk defended himself again, but the impact was so strong it drove him deep into the ground. He tried to stand, but Jian's speed was absurd. In the blink of an eye, another attack was already coming his way. The monk then used the freezing spell once more and laughed, saying he had already warned him. No matter how good his martial arts were, it would never be enough to defeat him. Gathering a dense glowing power in his palm, he declared that the protagonist was stronger than expected, and for that reason, he, the monk, could no longer hold back. Jian began to laugh, which enraged him even more. "You're on the brink of death and still dare to laugh?" the monk shouted, unleashing the purple void thunder technique. The attack was so devastating it completely destroyed the mountain temple, leaving a trail of destruction and hurling the protagonist against a distant mountain. The monk looked up at the sky, breathing heavily, and murmured a prayer to God, calling the protagonist friend. But sensing something strange beside him, he turned and saw Jian standing, his body covered in violet energy, about to unleash the exact same technique the monk had just used. Enraged, the monk prepared to strike again, demanding to know how the protagonist was still alive and why he was using his technique. Jian dodged the attack and countered, hitting the monk with the purple void thunder and sending him flying into the air, crashing him into one of the time towers. Lying on the ground, gravely wounded, the monk began to wonder why that boy, after only a few exchanges, had nearly mastered everything he had spent his whole life learning. Jian entered the temple, and the monk, his voice weak, said that before being eliminated, he wanted to know how the protagonist had managed to learn all his techniques so quickly. A few minutes earlier, a system screen had appeared before Jian saying, "New items added to inventory. Mimicry scroll, purple void technique, thunder technique, body immobilization technique, copperhead, and iron body technique." Yunshu, sitting under a tree, took a deep breath and said she had finally finished drawing. Without wasting any time, Jian swallowed all the scrolls at once, thinking that he had activated the iron body beforehand to counter the immobilization technique. The protagonist then said that if that was the case, he might just make it. But before the monk could reply, he vanished and charged forward, slamming him even deeper into the wall and shouting for his head to move already. Consumed by fury, Xian began attacking over and over without pause, saying that even if the purple void thunder technique was still on cooldown, he would finish the job with his own hands. He continued striking the monk relentlessly until, on the verge of death, the monk began to recall the past, asking himself what he had done wrong. The villagers at the foot of the mountain had suffered from poverty, hunger, and wars for generations, and all he had done was mercifully grant them freedom. So what was so wrong about that? Suddenly, the monk's form changed completely, turning into what looked like a true demon, screaming and asking what he had done wrong. Even the protagonist was startled to see that the man could still move. The monk clasped his hands together and activated a formation. A brilliant light began to radiate, enveloping the entire temple. It was the judgment of the purple void. Distracted, Jian looked up and wondered if the monk had been saving that move as his final strike. After a blinding flash of violet light, he vanished, and outside, Yunshu likely wouldn't be able to analyze that formation quickly, leaving him no choice but to fight alone and figure out what it was as he advanced. Suddenly, a black sphere in the sky began attacking the protagonist with bolts of lightning. He used the iron body to defend himself while trying to dodge, but as he stared at the sphere, something strange happened. It changed. Jian realized that a combined immobilization and lightning attack was heading straight for him, but he couldn't avoid it and was hit head-on, thrown back inside the temple. He got up as fast as he could and retreated, trying to use the iron body again, but was immobilized once more. Shocked, Jian wondered if the formation had no cooldown at all and if his opponent could immobilize him infinitely. A monk, now looking completely different, appeared behind him ready to deliver the final blow. The strike was so powerful it sent him flying, and as he was hurled through the air, Xian thought he could only use the iron body in the few moments he managed to break free. But before he could react, 3 more circles appeared around him. He realized he didn't have even a single second to catch his breath before another devastating attack began tearing everything apart. Outside, Yunshu watched everything unfold, worried for her master, frantically taking notes and begging him to hold on just a bit longer because she was almost done. Inside the formation, the temple had already been completely destroyed. The monk stepped on the protagonist and mocked him, telling him to keep laughing since he still had enough strength to do so. Jian then started laughing again, enraging the monk even further. Furious, he charged forward, saying that last time he had made a foolish mistake. But this time, he had completely immobilized the protagonist. However, before the blow landed, Jian activated another formation. The monk froze and a conflicting energy filled the area, triggering the judgment of the purple void. The protagonist stood up, and the monk, looking up, couldn't believe what he was seeing. He asked if Xian had actually used a larger formation to envelop his own, since the size of the formation and the spiritual energy were directly proportional. And although Xian's cultivation level was lower, his spiritual reserves seemed much greater. Outraged, the monk shouted that he would kill him and then extract his spiritual roots for research. The surrounding spheres began merging, transforming into a massive eye. Jian smiled up at it and asked if that was truly the monk's final move. The eye prepared to strike, but the protagonist activated his own paralysis skill, and everything around them froze completely. The monk, utterly confused, wondered why his formation hadn't worked and how he himself had ended up immobilized, concluding that perhaps the protagonist had paralyzed his formation with his own. He realized this went beyond simple immobilization. The effect was terrifying as he couldn't see, feel, or move, trapped only within his own thoughts. Jian walked up to him and began concentrating an immense amount of spiritual energy. The monk, alarmed, thought that he couldn't see what the protagonist was preparing, but assumed it was some kind of thunder or fire technique that, if it hit him directly, would leave him severely wounded, though he still held a faint hope of escaping. Suddenly, the attack expanded toward him. The energy was so immense it tore through the entire field, destroying the mountains behind and completely pulverizing the monk's body. The system appeared before Xian saying, "Evil monk eliminated. You have advanced to the fourth realm, early stage. New techniques acquired. Serpent iron body, immobilization technique, purple void thunder technique, and purple void judgment. New ability unlocked. Master-disciple harmony. When activated, if your disciple is nearby, the status bonuses you receive from them are increased proportionally, with a minimum boost of 30%. The higher the disciple's level, the greater the enhancement. Likewise, the disciple's techniques are also strengthened. The effect lasted up to 30 seconds but consumed a large amount of spiritual energy. Liu Yunshu advanced to the calligrapher rank and unlocked the skill mimicry refinement ability, allowing her to enhance copied techniques and develop even stronger versions of them. Sometime later on the bridge, Qifeng trembled with worry, wondering why her master hadn't returned yet, until she suddenly noticed him approaching. She ran to him and asked where Yunshu was. The protagonist replied that he had sent her back to the calligraphy shop and asked why she looked so anxious. Had something happened? A bit frightened, Qifeng said that the family patriarch had returned. Xian immediately went to the mansion, and as soon as he opened the door, he felt a murderous aura lingering in the air. The patriarch stood with his back turned, motionless. Xian realized it was a test and started laughing under the crushing pressure. The patriarch turned around and upon seeing his son's confident expression, thought that the rumors were true. His son had truly awakened his spiritual root upon coming of age, and his potential was exceptional. He also laughed, waved his hand and dissipated the killing intent, lightening the atmosphere. Xian was confused, unsure why the hostility had suddenly vanished, until the patriarch opened his arms, called him son, and said it had been too long, that he had grown so much, and that he was proud to have him as his heir. He then asked for a hug. This man was Ye Kai, patriarch of the Yi family, fifth realm, early stage. The protagonist stared at him, confused, trying to understand what was wrong, as that sudden change in attitude was suspicious. The patriarch sat down and said he knew how hard his son had worked all these years in his absence, asking if there was anything he wanted: gold, treasures, a larger house, even suggesting finding a woman from a powerful family for him to marry. Xian remained skeptical, remembering that the patriarch's wife and legitimate son had recently died, and after neglecting his illegitimate son for nearly 20 years, now he suddenly acted generous. It was clear the old man was plotting something. Taking advantage of the opportunity, Xian said that if his father was so eager to help, he had an idea. Sometime later, he gathered his two disciples who were amazed to see an enormous mansion. The protagonist smiled and said that from that day on, this would be their new home. Qifeng, still surprised, asked where he had gotten enough money to buy such a massive estate, recalling that he had already sold all the valuable materials they had brought from the demon cave. Xian laughed and said he had borrowed a bit from the family patriarch. Meanwhile, in the main mansion, Ye Kai was furious, shouting that he had promised to fulfill his son's reasonable requests, but that didn't mean he had to empty all the family's vaults. The next morning, in their new home, Xian was sleeping peacefully until he woke up startled by someone shouting his name. Jifeng opened the window and the protagonist grumbled that if she kept that up, she'd give him a heart attack someday. She insisted, saying there was someone standing at the front gate. Xian went to check and was surprised to see Yu Hui. She greeted him with a smile and said, "Hi, Master," while the system displayed a new notification. Character detected, Yu Hui, skilled creator. Xian was surprised and thought that, unlike the others who started as apprentices, Yu Hui had entered directly as a qualified creator. He led her inside and said the room next to his was hers. Qifeng asked Yu Hui what kind of good things she had in that suitcase she was carrying. With her eyes glowing red, Yu Hui got ready to show her and said it was a divine beast passed down through her family, a phoenix. Qifeng watched closely, impressed, seeing a faint red glow from inside, and grew nervous. But then, only a small chick came out. Yu Hui burst into laughter and hugged her companion, saying that the phoenix hadn't grown its feathers yet and that it was far too easy to fool her. So how could she call herself the older sister? Maybe they should switch roles instead. Suddenly, she looked to the side and noticed Yunshu at the window. Seeing another woman in the house, she smiled and pointed at the protagonist, teasing that he truly was quite the impressive predator. A bird flew overhead and she ordered it to come down slowly. Her ability struck the bird, making it land gently in her hand. Yu Hui told her master that it was just a messenger pigeon, and upon reading the note, she saw there was a new mission from the Demon Suppression Division. He turned around and began to leave. Yu Hui asked if she wasn't going along, but Xian replied that for now, no. She should stay home raising chickens properly, and if she had any questions, she could ask her two senior sisters. Qifeng walked up to her laughing, proudly declaring that she was the senior here now. When he arrived at a crater, the system announced, "Task 1. Clear the demonic caverns as ordered by the Demon Suppression Division. Task 2. Obtain the special feed required for Zhao Yuhui's breeding according to system instructions. Jian analyzed the area and said that this was indeed the right place and that this time it was going to be an underwater battle. Fortunately, that identity allowed him to use government resources, so he had borrowed a diving pearl. Without hesitation, he leapt into the crater and dove in. After descending a bit, he noticed an entrance guarded by two fish monsters. Suddenly, a hook baited with a piece of meat appeared beside one of them. One guard called to the other, laughing and saying that those stupid humans, even after all these years, still use such primitive methods against them. He added that they had already cultivated humanoid forms. So how could they possibly be dumb enough to bite that hook? The other guard, who had only half listened, lunged at the bait, saying that the meat smelled too good, and was immediately yanked upward. The first guard rushed up furiously, shouting that his partner was a complete idiot for falling for such a trick. When he reached the surface, the protagonist watched carefully and quickly threw the hook into his mouth. The guard scoffed, saying the protagonist was an even bigger fool for trying the same trick twice, and asked if he really thought he was as stupid as the other. Yet both of them ended up caught, and one started cursing the other, shouting that neither of them was in a better situation. The system notified, Skilled Fisherman Xu Xian, new fishing spell, unlocked, Lure. When you equip a fishing rod, the bait on the hook gains a special charm that attracts aquatic demons, increasing the chances of catching them. Jian continued advancing through the lake while elsewhere someone was watching him. An hour earlier, the Patriarch had met with the head of the division's guard. The chief commented that the protagonist always managed to defeat opponents slightly stronger than himself, and that this time was no different. Kai replied that it was fine, as he would handle it personally alongside his son. Back in the present, the Patriarch was laughing as he observed his son, thinking that no matter what happened, he needed to seize that brat's spiritual root for himself. A bit further ahead, Jian stopped and decided to test some of the techniques he had learned from that demonic monk. He activated a sensing spell and found no demons nearby, but suddenly, the rock beside him began to glow, and a massive explosion erupted. The area was completely obliterated, and the protagonist started sinking, one of his arms severed from his body. A monster appeared, mocking him, saying that trick wouldn't work either. It was far too easy to trap and kill him. Suddenly, a piece of meat appeared, and the monster realized it was a lure spell. Countless other monsters began swimming toward it. The leader screamed, asking what they were doing. It was just bait, they should return to their posts. But they kept gathering. From above, Jian used his paralyzing ability to freeze everything around him, and then unleashed the purple void thunder, striking them all at once. A massive explosion followed, obliterating every monster in the area and granting him a huge amount of experience points. The system announced, Advance from 4th Realm, Early Stage to 4th Realm, Minor Stage. Suddenly, an attack came flying at him. He noticed it and dodged quickly. Looking down, he saw the Armored Lobster Shrimp Commander with Water Cannon, 4th Realm, Minor Stage. Jian smiled excitedly, saying that the spell the boss had just used was interesting, as it reminded him of gunfire from his previous world. If he could learn it, it would be extremely useful. The protagonist used a linking spell to pinpoint the boss's location, and immediately followed with a freezing spell, but the enemy moved with incredible speed and evaded it. Jian noted that the distance between them was already beyond the range of his paralyzing spell. The boss then unleashed his multi-water explosion cannon, and the protagonist responded with the purple void thunder bullet. The two attacks collided, creating a chain of massive explosions. When the dust settled, another strike came flying towards Jian, but he dodged it effortlessly. He advanced toward one of the walls and looked up, spotting the boss in the distance. The gap between them was still too wide, and even the Law of Purple Thunder couldn't reach that far, so he decided to close the distance and charge straight at the enemy, evading the incoming attacks. The battle between the two raged on fiercely, devastating the entire area. Even with his high speed, the protagonist realized he couldn't fully keep up with the boss. He then drew his staff, gathered all his strength, and hurled it with precision. The dust stirred up by the fight obscured the boss's vision. Suddenly, the staff shot out from within the smoke. Though the boss narrowly avoided a fatal blow thanks to his incredible speed, the weapon still struck his shoulder. He began boasting that it was merely a scratch, and claimed it proved how slow the protagonist was. Jian made another subtle hand movement as the boss sneered, mocking that humans were truly foolish, and asking if he still hadn't realized none of his spells could hit him. But then, the staff behind him suddenly turned midair and came crashing down with full force, striking the monster squarely and sending him hurtling downward. The boss couldn't comprehend how that weapon could expand and retract freely, but before he could react, Jian seized the opening, dashed forward, and landed a devastating blow that caused a massive explosion, scattering blood through the water. The system notified that the enemy had been eliminated and all experience points had been gained. A moment later, Xian felt a searing pain and began sinking into the depths of the lake. Confused, he wondered how that could have happened. He had received the experience points and confirmed the monster's defeat. Moreover, the boss hadn't cast any spell before dying, so how had he been gravely injured? As he sank to the bottom, a figure approached and said he had finally succeeded, claiming he had been waiting for this moment. Xian turned his head and saw Patriarch Kai, who burst into laughter, saying he had waited there for a long time, and that the final strike would now be his. The system identified that man as being at the threshold of the fifth realm. Still collapsed, Xian asked how he hadn't sensed any spell and demanded to know how his father had managed to deal such a fatal blow. Kai explained with a grin that it was his exclusive, non-transferable secret technique, Fatal Twin Death, and noted that he hadn't even needed to intervene directly. While the two fought, he had secretly cast a curse on both the boss and his own son, linking their lives together. Thus, when one of them died, the other would suffer the same fatal wound. The patriarch admitted he was surprised, since the protagonist hadn't died alongside the monster, which meant his body was unbelievably resilient. Jian began laughing and Kai shouted, demanding how someone on the verge of death could still dare to laugh. Preparing to strike again, he said that after ripping out his son's spiritual root, he wanted to see if he would still find it funny. The patriarch lunged forward and unleashed a violent strike. Blood splattered, and he triumphantly declared that his son's spiritual root was finally his. But when he looked ahead, he realized his hand was touching only a stone statue. Shocked, he shouted that this was bad, and as he turned, he was immediately paralyzed by Jian. Kai, frozen in place, tried to speak, saying his son had used a shape-shifting spell combined with a paralysis technique, acknowledging that he had mastered magic exceptionally well. The protagonist replied with the dry irony that this trick worked on everyone. The patriarch tried to stall, thinking that since his cultivation was higher, if he could just buy a few seconds, he might break the binding spell and recast the curse. He began rambling, saying that if his son could at least tell him what had happened, he would die in peace. But he soon sensed a massive surge of spiritual energy gathering behind him and asked what Jian was planning to do. The protagonist replied coldly that he wouldn't give his father any time to keep stalling and declared that they would end this with big news and a fitting farewell. The patriarch, terrified, watched the overwhelming aura emanating from his son and trembled, asking who that ruthless monster before him was, because he was no longer his child. Jian advanced with fury in his eyes, saying he was merely an overburdened soul that had died suddenly and somehow ended up reincarnated there. The impact of his attack was even more catastrophic than expected, sending shockwaves throughout the depths of the lake. The system appeared with a notification. Ye Kai eliminated. You have advanced to the 5th realm early stage. Items obtained. Copper shrimp cannon. Ingeniously crafted, but seems to fire almost anything. Shrimp monster meat. Fish monster meat. Turtle monster meat. Ye Kai's spiritual root. Sometime later, back at the mansion, Xian laid all the collected items on the table. Qifang watched in awe and asked if all of that was for her. He replied that she should share the cooking ingredients with Yu Hui, and if it wasn't enough, she could take more from the system inventory since plenty was stored there. Qifang pouted and complained that her master was being unfair, asking why she had to share the good stuff with Yu Hui. Jian simply laughed and told her not to worry, promising that later he'd help her gather even more materials until she had more than enough. Yu Hui, meanwhile, remarked that before that she should focus on properly raising the chicks. Annoyed, Qifang retorted that they were just chicks, while the protagonist asked how they were doing. Yu Hui sighed deeply and Xian suggested they try feeding them some monster meat. The two girls exchanged glances, then offered a small piece of meat to one of the chicks, watching closely to see what would happen next. The system announced Zhao Yu Hui's specialty, rapid feeding. After consuming spiritually infused food, an animal's growth rate increases by 100%. The chick began devouring the meat and suddenly a beam of light burst from its body, transforming it rapidly as the system updated. Spiritual beast, 1st realm, phoenix stage. Yu Hui let out a teasing laugh and asked her friend what she thought, saying that the phoenix had finally arrived. Irritated, Qifang pointed at the creature and shouted that it was nothing more than a fancy-looking chicken. The tension between them rose as Yu Hui stepped closer, saying that if she called it a phoenix, then it was a phoenix, and asked if her big sister had a problem with that. Qifang snapped back, demanding who she was calling little sister, saying she was still growing and warning that if Yu Hui kept it up, she'd confiscate all the monster meat. Jian merely watched the bickering until another system message appeared. Experience points increased. Current stage, 5th realm, early stage. The protagonist reflected that the experience gained from his disciples had been decreasing, and simply making them complete daily tasks was no longer enough. Then the system announced, Disciple Profession Tasks Unlocked. Assign these tasks to the appropriate disciple. Upon completion, the disciple's cultivation level will increase significantly, and you will also receive a considerable amount of experience points. Surprised, Jian decided that very night to gather everyone in his room and begin passing on his knowledge. The system notified, Summoning Spell Taught. He explained that they could now all use the summoning spell. That way, when completing missions alone, they could call him in case of emergency. Yunshu asked if he wouldn't be going with them, but Jian replied that he was far too busy these days to accompany them. While climbing a mountain, Jian thanked Chang'an for his help in the underwater monster cavern, saying that without his information, he might not have been prepared for his father's sneak attack. Chang'an replied that it was nothing and revealed that he had been watching one of Kai's subordinates, a man with a scar on his face, for some time, and that when the man borrowed the diving orb from the warehouse, it was clear he was planning something. Jian asked why Chang'an had decided to help him, since they had only met once, during the Demon Suppression Division's entrance exam, and barely spoken since. Laughing, Chang'an said that Jian already knew the answer. He wasn't talented, his aptitude was low, and even maintaining the lowest position in the division took great effort. Finding a reliable ally was the best way to survive there. From the moment he saw the proud eldest daughter of the Dao family kneel before Jian to become his disciple, he knew the man was the best ally he could have. Furthermore, after everything that happened, the scarred man had suddenly resigned and gone home, though Chang'an didn't know why. A few days later, inside a small cave, the scarred man trembled with fear, cursing whoever had sent him to patrol that mountain, and wondering how such a powerful monster could be lying in ambush. Before him, a massive black demonic bear of the third realm attacked violently, slamming him against the wall as its eyes glowed menacingly. Not far away, Yu opened her eyes and informed her master that everything had been resolved. Xian confirmed, saying everything was under control now. His father's most important informant had been eliminated. Then Yu asked why the High Council of the Demon Suppression Division had summoned him this time. After climbing the last steps, Chang'an sighed and said that, unfortunately, he couldn't answer that question. His rank was far too low to know about such matters. Even so, he said Jian would understand everything once he met the Great Ones, pointing upward where a temple floated in the sky. Jian, astonished, asked if that was some kind of joke. Did they really expect him to climb all the way up there using just that flimsy piece of paper, without a single staircase? Chang'an replied that this was exactly why people like him could never reach such heights. Determined, Jian steadied himself and began climbing the paper, moving with impressive speed. As he ascended, he realized the material was surprisingly durable, made from some kind of magical compound. Suddenly, a light flashed ahead and a rapid attack shot toward him. He dodged instinctively, thinking the place must be vulnerable. If he could get there, a monster could too. But then he noticed the presence of an automatic defensive seal. Soon more attacks appeared, and he activated the iron body to protect himself. The blade struck his body, but he endured, feeling the shock reverberate through him as he continued his ascent. However, new blades materialized on both sides, attacking him from behind. He realized that the flying sword seal was extremely advanced, equipped with automatic targeting, and concluded that if his iron body took even 2 more hits, it would be destroyed. With no other option, he tried to use the immobilization spell, wondering if it might work against magical constructs, but it had no effect. A massive explosion engulfed him, and when the dust cleared, a sword hovered just inches away from piercing his chest, but it stopped. Someone had intervened. Standing before him was Wang Sihan, deputy commander of the Demon Suppression Division, a cultivator of the 8th realm. Sihan stared at him and said he truly was reckless, noting that he barely had time to come down and greet him before the boy decided to start climbing. He explained that the seals on the paper stairway were powerful enough to obliterate even a 5th realm demon. With a single command, the sword dissolved into thin air. Jian asked if Sihan had also disabled all the seals above, but the deputy commander placed a hand on his shoulder and replied that there was no need to go that far. In the blink of an eye, the two shot upward like a rocket. The speed was so overwhelming that Jian's face distorted from the pressure of the wind. He thought that 8th realm experts really could soar freely through the skies, and imagined that if Yunshu were there, she would definitely try to copy that technique. Suddenly, something opened in the sky, an enormous portal appeared, and a colossal demon emerged beside them. Jian's heart tightened. The suffocating pressure was identical to what he had felt the first time he met Yuhui. The demonic aura was so dense it felt like his bones were being ground into dust. The monster extended its hand to grab him, but Sihan reacted instantly, pulling Jian aside and dodging at the last possible moment before they reached the summit. The deputy commander studied the portal and muttered that something was wrong, questioning why a demonic rift had opened so close to the Demon Suppression Division. Jian, alarmed, replied that this wasn't the time to think. The demon was preparing for something big. Sihan, still focused on the portal, murmured again that something about it was very strange. The massive Eighth Realm demon began concentrating energy in its mouth, preparing to fire. Jian felt the crushing difference in power but couldn't simply stand by. He activated the purple void thunder, thinking that even if it was like a praying mantis trying to stop a chariot, he had to try. Sihan turned and casually caught the blast in his hand, crushing and dispersing it as if it were nothing. Jian was stunned. The power gap was absurd. His attack had been neutralized by raw force from a single hand. Even though they were only 3 realms apart, the difference felt absolutely insurmountable. Sihan explained calmly that using a 5th realm technique against an 8th realm demon was like an ant trying to move a tree, and that he shouldn't waste his energy. Frustrated and anxious, Jian shouted, asking why the deputy commander wasn't doing anything as the demon unleashed a colossal attack toward them. Sihan responded by raising his hand and forming a massive spiritual matrix that expanded outward, creating a shamanic shield of energy. The attack struck the barrier, but Sihan's expression didn't change. He simply reinforced the seal and reflected the blow back. Jian watched in awe as the devastating power was deflected so effortlessly. The beam shot toward the distant mountains, and upon impact, it triggered an enormous explosion, like a weapon of mass destruction, leaving behind a crater several kilometers wide and obliterating everything in the vicinity. Staring at the aftermath, Jian was speechless, realizing that the blast had annihilated entire mountain ranges as if they were made of sand. The power was comparable to a nuclear explosion, and he couldn't believe he'd thought his purple void thunder could withstand something like that. The great demon, realizing its attack had failed, began retreating as the portal closed before them. Jian commented that the enemy had been forced to retreat, glancing at Sihan with a mix of admiration and awe. That man was monstrously strong, someone who could destroy an entire city alone. Sihan, however, kept his gaze fixed on the sky, deep in thought, saying that the demon had withdrawn far too quickly, which might mean it had appeared only to test the strength of the demon suppression division. Sometime later, inside the temple, Jian advanced cautiously. The hall was vast and silent, completely empty, just as he'd been told. Then, a light began to glow ahead and a feminine figure materialized at the center. The system immediately identified her. Li Wan, Empress of the Long Yuan Kingdom. Realm level, unknown. A chill ran down Jian's spine as he noticed her name in the system glowing in a unique color, one reserved only for true powers of the world. He recalled a recent conversation with Yunshu when he had asked her about the so-called dragon speech. His disciple had explained that if he ever wanted to understand how powerful the strongest person in a nation could be, he should witness the royal bloodline's exclusive spell, the dragon speech. According to her, that spell had changed the course of countless battles, and when those golden words were spoken, all living beings were compelled to kneel. Li Wan gazed at him calmly and asked why, having already met them, he was still not kneeling. In that instant, an overwhelming pressure descended upon Jian, forcing him to his knees before her, crushing his body until his forehead touched the floor. He realized this was beyond any confrontation he had ever experienced, even greater than when he faced his father, because this time there was no room for resistance. It was as if he were being oppressed by another dimension, by an existence that transcended the concept of cultivation realms. The woman standing before him was, without doubt, one of humanity's most powerful beings. The Empress studied the young man with interest and asked if it was true that he had awakened his spiritual roots only after reaching adulthood, finding the notion fascinating. She said that he had traversed in a single year a path that took most cultivators more than a decade to walk, and that even in the capital his name was already known. Struggling to breathe under the crushing pressure, Jian humbly replied that it was merely luck. Compared to his companions, he was nothing special. Li Wan smiled faintly, saying he was far too modest and invited him to stand. The Empress mentioned that she had heard rumors that the proud southern prodigy Zhao Yu Hui had accepted him as her master. She recounted that when she was young, she had accompanied the emperor on a journey to the south and stayed with the Zhao family. She clearly remembered how that girl's father had invited countless renowned experts to teach her, yet she rejected them all. Intrigued, she asked how Jian had managed to accomplish what none of those great masters could. The protagonist calmly replied that he had merely promised to help her raise a phoenix. Li Wan suddenly stood, slamming her hand on the table, her eyes gleaming with curiosity, saying that was truly fascinating. Her voice echoed through the grand hall as she solemnly declared that he was to hear the imperial decree. Jian knelt respectfully and she proclaimed, "From this moment forward, you are promoted to assistant commander of the Demon Suppression Division and appointed governor of Yezhou, effective immediately." Jian accepted the decree with gratitude, bowing before her. The Empress observed him and said she hoped to witness more of the extraordinary feats he was capable of, then ordered him to withdraw. When night fell, a voice echoed from the shadows of the throne. A spiritual presence manifested behind her, taking the form of a dragon woven from pure energy. The creature questioned why Her Majesty would favor that boy so much, claiming he was suspected of killing his own father, mother, and brother in cold blood. Li Wan remained composed and answered that there was no solid evidence. And even if it were true, he had merely struck back against the cruel fate that had oppressed him. With a melancholy look, she said that if she had realized her own elder brother's malicious intentions sooner, her spiritual roots would not have been stolen, nor would her power have faded away. Now, with the demons constantly provoking humanity, she feared she might be acting out of desperation. She knew that once the great demons discovered she no longer possessed the strength to contain the Demon King, it would only be a matter of time before the borders fell. Later, Xian was transferred to a new city. Upon arrival, he observed the city walls and remarked, surprised, that he thought he had been assigned a comfortable post, but instead had been sent to a miserable frontier city. "The lowest GDP I've ever seen," he muttered. Chengen looked at him, puzzled, and asked what this GDP thing meant, realizing the protagonist had invented yet another strange term no one could understand, grumbling that following this man was an unpredictable adventure every single day. Xian just laughed and told him to keep addressing him by name, saying it felt strange for them to suddenly change the way they spoke to each other. Chang'an agreed and took the chance to ask why he hadn't brought his disciples along, since it would have been a good opportunity for them to see the world. Xian replied that they were all focused on their individual cultivation for now. Meanwhile, in front of a sealed demonic cave, Qifang, now the chief of Xiu residence and known as the Bone Slayer, prepared to act. She commented that this was one of the demonic caverns sealed by the Demon Suppression Division and could only be opened with an official decree from her master. Without hesitation, she burned the seal and opened the entrance. A demon lunged from the darkness to attack her, but she was already ready. She drew one of her knives and with a single precise slash, cleaved the creature clean in half. Several pig demons appeared, roaring in fury, and Sifang smirked with disdain, remarking that the kitchen's pork supply had been running low lately, so they had shown up at just the right time. Gripping her blades tightly, she said she needed to restock. The demon's screams echoed through the cavern until one of them, wounded and terrified, tried to flee. Suddenly, a shadow streaked past, and a powerful blow slammed the creature against the wall. Emerging from the darkness was Zhu Feng, captain of the Pig Demon Defense Unit, a cultivator of the Fourth Realm. He stared at Qifeng with a mocking grin and said his subordinates were fools to be frightened by a mere little girl. Qifeng approached calmly, and Zhu Feng asked if using his men as ingredients for pork dishes wasn't a bit excessive. Qifeng laughed, taunting him, saying he should just admit it. He clearly thought like a pig, too. Enraged by her words, the captain growled that he'd do the same to her and charged at full force. He tried to strike, but Qifeng dodged swiftly and in one precise motion slashed his calf. Even more furious, Zhu Feng attacked again, but her speed far surpassed his. Qifeng evaded once more and delivered another clean strike. The captain sneered, saying she moved like a flea, hopping and dodging endlessly, and that if he fought like her, maybe he'd be just as annoying. But those little cuts were nothing more than tickles. Then he ramped up his speed even further. Qifeng avoided every blow until she slipped slightly. Zhu Feng spotted the opening and lunged, hitting her before she could move. The impact threw her to the ground, raising a cloud of dust. When the dust settled, he smiled in satisfaction, convinced he had won, and said that, in the end, she'd make a fine snack. But then his weapon began to tremble. Qifeng was still alive, gripping the hammer so hard that she ripped it from his hands. Zhu Feng stared in disbelief, wondering where that girl had found such monstrous strength. Qifeng rose, eyes blazing, her body radiating fury and energy. With one motion, she hurled the hammer aside and advanced, dual blades gleaming in her hands. The captain noticed she had switched to smaller knives and mocked her, saying her strength was impressive, but using such tiny blades against him was pure suicide. He attacked again, but she dodged and countered with such speed that he barely realized what had happened. He laughed scornfully, asking if she was still trying to tickle him, and raised his other hammer, but before he could swing, his arm was completely torn apart. Shocked by the pain, Zhu Feng trembled and screamed, unable to understand how she could suddenly cut through his flesh and skin so easily. Looking closer, he saw that Qifeng now wielded two blades glowing with power. She began to speak, saying she was never good at studying. She'd spent her whole life working at her father's butcher shop, cutting meat from dawn till dusk. Zhu Feng, confused, yelled, demanding to know what she was talking about. Qifeng released her aura and continued, saying she had never managed to master Yunshu's written techniques because she lacked the talent for learning from books like her master. Then, with a cold smile, she concluded that after years of chopping meat and practicing at the butcher's, she had become a true master of slaughter. a butcher of demons and pigs alike. Furious, Ju Feng roared for her to stop spouting nonsense and tore off his clothes as his body transformed into a massive wild boar. Using the wild boar charge technique, he rushed at her with terrifying speed. Qifeng dodged, but her counterattack left only a shallow scratch. She realized his flesh and skin were hardening rapidly. Cracking sounds echoed through the cavern. The ceiling was starting to collapse. If the fight continued, everything would come down. Ju Feng readied himself for another charge, but this time Qifeng didn't retreat. She moved forward head-on, activating her X-ray vision and analyzing every muscle and bone connection in his body with precision. Her body and blades became enveloped in a cutting aura, and with a fierce cry, she unleashed her ultimate technique, demon-slaying blade technique, the butcher's precision. With one devastating strike, Qifeng shredded countless attacks at once, completely deboning Ju Feng in mere seconds. A notification appeared before her. Pig Demon defeated. Realm advanced to Imperial Chef. Smiling, she collected all the materials left behind and commented with satisfaction that the battle had truly been worth it. After all, she had obtained rare pig essence, wild boar's reinforced tusks, and a mysterious letter. At that moment, Jian also received a system notification. Host's experience points increased, advanced to minor completion of the 5th realm. Later, in the meeting hall, the protagonist met with Sun Qian, the mayor of Yizhou. The man greeted him and asked what had brought him to such a remote region. Jian calmly explained that he had been sent by the Empress herself to oversee the progress of reclaiming the lost territories. Sun Qian sighed and said that perhaps Jian was unaware, but the imperial court had never sent reinforcements to that area, making it nearly impossible to recover those lands with only local forces. He added that he had already warned the previous governors about it. Then he began to explain that Yizhou bordered the vast forest sea, and that whenever the pig demons ended one of their rampages, they would flee deep into it. With so few soldiers under his command, he dared not pursue them into such dangerous territory. Moreover, the refugees who once lived beyond the forest had likely all been slaughtered by the pig demons. Therefore, he questioned whether there was any point in trying to recover those lands at all. Jian stared at him and asked if he had at least sent someone to confirm the situation. The mayor, visibly uneasy, admitted that to confirm anything, they would first have to cross the forest. But to do so, they'd need to get past the leader of the pig demons who guarded the mountain. That leader, he said, was unimaginably powerful, and every attempt to face him had ended in tragedy. It wasn't worth the cost, he concluded. With a sarcastic laugh, Sun Qian remarked that if the imperial envoy was in such a hurry, he was welcome to try it himself. After all, rumors said he had risen through the ranks very quickly, so surely he must have extraordinary skills. Jian smiled and clapped his hands, saying that since the mayor had brought it up, that would do just fine. Suddenly, a blinding light flared behind him, followed by a powerful vibrating sound. Surprised, he turned around and asked what was happening, and before him appeared Qifeng, freshly summoned, still holding the spoils of her last battle. Sun Qian's eyes widened when he saw the enormous boar tusks she carried, stammering in disbelief as he asked if that meant what he thought it did. Qifeng confirmed, reporting that the pig demon leader had been slain, and therefore dinner could now be pork stew or roasted meat. The mayor was speechless, unable to believe that the terrifying mountain guardian had been killed by a single girl. Qifeng then mentioned there was one more thing. She produced a piece of parchment and explained that she had found a strange letter on the demon's body. Sun Qian's expression shifted. There was a flicker of fear in his eyes, while Jian, suspicious, took the letter and examined it. As soon as he tried to open it, a magic circle ignited, and he instinctively hurled it away. They both watched as the parchment emitted an ominous glow. Qifeng asked what it meant, and Jian explained that it was a letter sealed with a cryptographic spell, something that could only be broken through a specific engraved sequence. Qifeng asked what they should do next, and Jian replied that they would take it to Yunshu later so she could attempt to decipher it. Then he cast a sharp glance at the mayor and said that since the guardian had already been defeated, nothing was stopping him from sending men to verify the situation now. Sun Qian, pale and trembling, seemed to be hiding something, but obeyed the imperial envoy's order and dispatched a small force for investigation. From atop the city wall, he watched nervously as the soldiers departed. Shaking, he muttered that Jian had insisted on going so he couldn't be blamed if something happened. Not long after, deep within the forest, the soldiers commented that they had been walking for a long time and asked if they could take a break. They sat near the edge of a cliff, and one of the guards offered some water, but the protagonist refused, saying he didn't need it. The guards exchanged glances, and another offered some buttered chicken, but he declined again. With a stern look, Jian told them they could stop pretending and said he would perform a little magic trick, guessing what was going on. Both the chicken and the water were poisoned. The guards fell silent, and he continued, saying that they had deliberately made him sit with his back to the cliff to cut off his escape route. Jian pointed forward, stating that there were many people hidden in the forest. Every single soldier in that squad had been sent to kill him. Countless armed men began emerging from the trees. Tai Liang, commander of Yizhou's city defense army, a cultivator of the Fourth Realm, stepped forward with a smirk and said that since the envoy had figured everything out, there was no need to keep up the act, and invited him to jump off the cliff to save them the trouble. Jian calmly replied that he didn't want to, which only enraged the commander further. Tai Liang attacked, shouting that Jian was seeking his own death. Their blows collided, the shockwaves frightening the surrounding soldiers. Furious, Jian shouted that Tai Liang, supposedly the elite of the city's defense army, instead of fighting demons, was wasting his efforts fighting his own people and asked if this was how all the previous inspectors had died. The commander barked an order for the entire army to attack at once. The protagonist began defending and dodging the incoming strikes until he was driven to the edge of the cliff. Tai Liang shouted that he had nowhere left to run, and one of the soldiers lunged forward. Jian decided to retaliate, just a little. Gathering all his strength into his palm, he released a sweeping wave of energy that cut through everything in front of him. Trees, blades, and bodies were sliced apart in an instant, each struck by a fatal blow. Before falling, Tai Liang stared ahead and muttered that the person before him wasn't Jian. How could that be? From the very start, Qifeng had switched places with her master and wiped out the entire squad effortlessly, gaining a massive surge of experience. She looked toward the cliff and remarked that her mission had been a complete success, though she wondered how her master's progress was going. A short distance deeper in the forest, the protagonist reached a camp where a woman was forging weapons, an apprentice of Ti Sanyang. Hearing a commotion, she turned and saw a guard approaching an old woman lying on the ground. The guard cursed, calling her a useless witch, and demanded to know who had allowed her to eat the bread. Trembling and emaciated, the old woman begged for mercy, explaining that since her son had died from overwork, all his tasks had fallen onto her shoulders. Forced to haul hundreds of iron carts every day with that frail body, she could barely go on. The guard knelt beside her and spat that everyone in that refugee camp should be grateful to Lord Dog for letting them live. He had surrendered to the Pig Demon clan, giving them the privilege of forging weapons and hauling supplies for their new masters. If she couldn't finish her labor, she was worthless, and worthless people were sent to the pig demons as snacks to be served with wine. One of the pig demons began drooling, and the guard stretched out his hand, shouting that he would feed her to the pig right now. Terrified, the old woman pleaded for her life, but the blacksmith stepped forward, asking the guard to show mercy. She offered to take over the woman's workload in exchange for just 2 extra buns a day. She led the old woman aside and helped her sit down. The elder thanked her through tears, saying she owed her life to her kindness, but warned that the girl already worked endlessly at the forge and hauled hundreds of iron carts a day. She feared this was too much for her. Sanyang smiled, flexed her strong arms, and told her not to worry, saying she always kept a little extra strength in reserve. The old woman sighed and said that every day she wondered when they would finally leave that living hell, where people died constantly and life was worse than that of insects. As a small bee hovered nearby, the old woman continued, saying it had been so long since they'd been abandoned there, and that no soldiers had ever come to rescue them. Had the imperial court truly forsaken them? The blacksmith urged her not to lose faith, saying that as long as they still believed, there was hope that someone would come to save them. The bee thought to itself that this woman was a blacksmith, and becoming her apprentice might be useful for learning how to forge weapons. The protagonist, in the form of that bee, continued flying around, studying the area. He realized that the troops originally sent to reclaim the lost territories had instead been handed over to the Pig Demon clan, and the refugees had been enslaved to forge weapons and prepare supplies for their captors. From above, he spotted a group atop the cliff. A massive boar sat watching over everything. It was the Grand Chief of the Pig Demon clan, Zhu Kei, a cultivator of the Sixth Realm. The chief asked Lord Dog how the preparations for battle were coming along. Lord Dog, commander of the refugee basin's garrison, replied that they were nearly ready and would march toward Yizhou within 3 days. Zhu Kei reminded him of their agreement. Once the city fell, all its inhabitants would be offered to his brothers as a banquet. Lord Dog grinned, saying those lowly ants belonged to Zhu Kei. He could roast, fry, steam, or stew them, however he liked. Even Lord Pig commented that humans were crueler to their own kind than demons could ever be, and if not for their skin, they might as well be the same species. Hearing all of it, Jian understood he needed to warn Qifeng immediately. He sent a letter explaining that the mayor of Yezhou was conspiring with the rebels of the refugee basin to organize an uprising, instructing her to keep Sun Qian under surveillance and arrest him at once if the situation worsened. Reading the letter, Qifeng sighed in exasperation that her master still insisted on writing horizontally, even after she had told him countless times that writing in that dynasty was done vertically. That night, while Sanyang pushed a wheelbarrow through the tunnels, she heard someone shouting for the workers to move faster. Curious, she peeked from behind a rock and saw a group of people being herded into a cave. Among them, the same old woman she had saved earlier. The people wondered where they were being taken. Some believed they were finally being set free, while others grew suspicious as they realized they were bound and being shoved forward by force. The old woman looked at one of the pigs and asked if they were really going to let them go. But at the end of the cave there was nothing but a cliff filled with corpses and bones piled at the bottom. The first woman in line panicked and screamed for help, but the pig demon killed her instantly and tossed her body into the abyss. She landed on a small ledge and the pig demons immediately dragged what was left, tearing her clothes apart. One of them gave orders saying to drag the bodies away, make clean cuts, and hang the carcasses, sending the freshest meat to the chief. The leading pig added that a special batch needed to be set aside for the high-ranking human officials in the capital. One of the other pigs, horrified, asked if they truly ate their own kind. The chief replied that race didn't matter. There would always be those who chose to be worse than pigs and dogs. Besides, he added, keeping that kind of control would allow them to blackmail the humans when they attacked the capital in the future. Suddenly, another body fell from above, and one of the pigs commented that another shipment had arrived, a sign that many people had died that day. At the top, only the old woman remained standing. One of the pigs said there was just one left and they should finish the job quickly so they could go home. The pig charged to kill her, but the blacksmith leaped forward, saving the old woman once again. One of the pigs growled angrily, asking what she was doing there, and the girl tried to help the old woman up, telling her to run. The elder, however, looked back and cried out that it wouldn't work. Dragging her along would only slow the girl down and neither of them would escape. She begged the blacksmith to leave her and flee alone. The girl hesitated for a moment, then firmly declared that if that was the case, she would fight instead. The pig snarled that she was asking for death, but the blacksmith blocked his strike using sheer brute strength. The pig was stunned to see the frail-looking young woman hold his arm so firmly. She gathered all her power and punched him in the stomach, sending him flying backward. Another pig, shocked, asked if she knew martial arts, but before he could react, she grabbed a rock and charged. The pig tried to defend himself with his sword, but she shattered both the blade and his body, killing them both in an instant. Breathing heavily, the girl looked down at her hands in disbelief, murmuring that she never imagined all those years at the forge would make her body so strong. All that effort hadn't been in vain after all. The old woman stared in awe, unable to believe what she had just witnessed. But soon countless other pig demons appeared, shouting that there was a human intruder and calling for reinforcements to stop her from escaping. Seeing the swarm of enemies, the blacksmith realized she couldn't fight them all. She grabbed the old woman and said it was time to run. But as they reached the cave's exit, a human guard stood before them. One of the pigs ordered him to stop the fugitives immediately. The soldier drew his sword and charged at the girl, and with the speed of his strike, she closed her eyes, resigned, certain she couldn't dodge or defend herself. When she opened them again, she realized she wasn't hurt. Trembling, she turned around and saw all the pig demons shredded to pieces around her. In the midst of them, the guard revealed himself. It was the protagonist. He smiled and said it had been close. He almost didn't make it in time. The old woman began to thank him, but he interrupted, saying that place wasn't safe, and using his ability transformed all three of them into bees. The blacksmith, astonished, said the hero was truly incredible, his power unbelievable, while the old woman could hardly believe she was flying. Once far from the camp, the protagonist said he had already taken the old woman to a safe place and told the blacksmith not to worry. Still breathless, the girl said he had saved them both, and she didn't know how to repay him. Jian smiled and asked if she had a dream. The girl froze at the sudden question, and after thinking for a moment, answered that she had always dreamed of becoming an imperial master artisan, but the blacksmith's guild was too exclusive and had never accepted her as an apprentice, leaving her to forge only simple, low-grade weapons. Jian smiled again and told her to become his disciple. He could help her fulfill that dream or even surpass it. The girl, stunned, asked if he was serious, and the protagonist confirmed it, saying that all she had to do was call him Master. But before he could finish speaking, he noticed she was no longer beside him. Looking ahead, he saw her kneeling, bowing deeply in respect, begging him to accept her oath as his disciple. Instantly, spiritual energy filled the area and the system responded, detecting a new presence. New disciple detected. Tai Sanyang, rank apprentice. Specialties: forging, great strength. After everything was settled, Sanyang asked her new master how he planned to reclaim that territory. Xian thought for a moment and replied that right now, they had almost no combat strength available. Qifeng was busy suppressing the rebellion in the city. Yunshu still couldn't fight on the front lines, and Yu Hui was in the middle of her level ascension, so there was only one option left. Sanyang, not quite understanding, simply watched. In the enemy leader's cabin, a man approached and a guard stopped him, asking what he was doing there. The man replied that he had come to deliver fresh human meat to the chief. The guard reminded him that carrying weapons was forbidden, so he threw his swords to the ground and proceeded inside. Ju Kei, the chief, asked about the small amount of meat this time, and the man explained that the kitchen was testing a new seasoning. This was just a sample for him to taste. Outside, Sanyang asked Xian if transforming into a bee for a stealth attack would work. He shook his head, explaining that the chief's rank was higher than his, so he would likely see through such a disguise. It would be better to infiltrate disguised as human soldiers. Xian then handed her an axe and said seriously that she had a crucial task. As soon as he entered the tent, she must throw the axe with all her strength, without hesitation. When she saw her master enter, Sanyang prepared herself, gathering all her energy before hurling the axe with full force. As the weapon cut through the air across the camp, she asked if that would really make a difference. Xian replied that yes, if the attack made the chief turn his head, that would be enough. Ju Kei noticed the incoming axe and with perfect reflexes caught it before it hit, muttering that such cheap tricks wouldn't work on him. In that instant, Xian acted. Moving so fast he became almost invisible, he appeared behind the chief and grabbed him by the neck, trying to strangle him. Ju Kei, enraged, demanded to know how a mere human dared to ambush the great clan leader. Xian told him to shut up and just die. Ju Kei gripped his weapon, laughing, asking if Xian truly thought he could kill him by strangulation, then raised his hammer, declaring he would crush him. Before the blow landed, Xian kicked the chair out from under them and hurled himself off the cliff, dragging the enemy with him. In midair, Ju Kei shouted that Xian was a fool if he thought they would die together. Even if they fell, he would rise and tear Xian's body apart until nothing remained but minced flesh. The protagonist's eyes turned cold as he replied, "Who the hell said I'd die with garbage like you?" Then he pointed two fingers toward the chief's head and unleashed the purple void thunder technique, a lightning strike piercing straight through Ju Kei's neck. The chief fell but quickly began to rise again, his body smaller now, his skin charred by demonic energy. Xian realized the monster had burned much of his own power to regenerate and could no longer sustain his colossal form. In response, Xian reduced his own size as well, balancing his energy consumption. The two glared at each other and the true battle began. Xian rushed forward with rapid strikes, but Ju Kei blocked each one. Their weapons clashed violently, the sound of impact echoing across the cliffside. With each collision, Xian noticed the enemy's hammers growing heavier. They were enchanted weapons. He shifted tactics and lunged again. Ju Kei raised a hammer to block, but this time Xian changed his angle at the last second, ducked low, and struck the demon's abdomen, hurling him back with the brutal force and blasting open a massive crater in the mountain. Ju Kei fell heavily, his body trembling, screaming that this human was terrifying, and admitted that if he hadn't drained so much energy during the first exchange, he would never have been pressured by someone of such a lower rank. Suddenly, Xian's staff shot forward with full force toward the chief, but Ju Kei narrowly dodged, growling in frustration that his opponent wouldn't give him a single moment to breathe. He grabbed both hammers again and tried to crush the staff, but it suddenly shrank and slipped out of range. Stunned, the chief looked to the side and saw Xian already at a safe distance. With a mocking grin, Xian taunted him, adopting the tone of a street fighter, asking if the pig was trying to charge his hammers with energy again because, this time, he wouldn't let him. Ju Kei roared furiously that a weak human like him could never restrict his weapon. He then began smashing the two hammers together, producing an ear-splitting sound. Xian's eyes widened as he realized that simply clashing the weapons against each other was enough to recharge their power, something that shouldn't even be possible. And without hesitation, he cast a freezing spell to interrupt the process. Yet he knew that the higher an enemy's rank, the greater their resistance to paralysis spells. And that meant one thing. He couldn't afford to waste a single second. Xian charged forward with full force, activating the serpent swarm technique, causing his staff to multiply into countless strikes. The blows flew in every direction, but Ju Kei countered by slamming his hammers into the ground, making the earth quake and raising chunks of stone that intercepted Xian's attacks. He quickly realized that his offensive was being blocked by the floating rocks, and noticed the chief using the debris as weapons, smashing the stones and launching them toward him like projectiles. Xian dodged as best he could, retreating gradually, thinking that for a moment he had expected something grand from those hammers. But it was just Ju Kei's brute strength hurling stone fragments everywhere. Even if the attacks weren't particularly lethal, their sheer volume was overwhelming. Suddenly, the chief struck the ground again, lifting an enormous boulder before smashing it to pieces, sending a storm of shards flying like a rain of blades. Seeing that there was no room to dodge, Xian spun his staff rapidly, creating a defensive barrier that blocked the barrage as the entire area was torn apart. When the dust began to settle, he exhaled heavily and remarked that he had burned through a great deal of spiritual energy, but at least he'd managed to block the strike. He analyzed the situation coldly. The demon had already taken a purple void thunderstrike through the throat, endured multiple direct hits, and consumed much of his own energy. He had to be nearing collapse. But as the dust cleared, Jian noticed something strange. The enemy was gone. He glanced around, tense, wondering if the chief had fled while he was defending. Then the ground began to tremble as he sensed spiritual power concentrating all around him. The scattered stones started floating, glowing faintly and transformed into sharp, metallic bullets. They all fired toward him at once. Jian immediately cast freeze, raising a dense wall of ice around himself that halted the metallic storm completely. Even so, he hadn't expected that. The broken stones from before had been transmuted into iron spikes through some kind of alchemical spell. Surveying the battlefield, he concluded that Zhu Kai was versatile, skilled both in close combat and at range, capable of pressuring him from every angle. He wondered what the demon's next move would be, but before he could react, the ground beneath him shattered, and countless iron stakes erupted upward, impaling his body. Zhu Kai emerged through the smoke and chaos, laughing with contempt, saying that if he hadn't been so badly injured by the ambush earlier, he'd never have needed to rely on long-range sorcery. He added that he had been tracking the protagonist from underground using his spiritual sense, confirming that this was his true body and not an illusion before revealing himself at last. Even if Xian had become a terrifying human, he was completely outmatched. Suddenly the chief froze, eyes widening as he asked what was happening. Unable to comprehend why he was still affected by a paralysis spell, Xian had activated the purple void ceiling formation. Zhu Kai began trembling in fear, shouting that it was impossible. How could a dead man cast a formation? Glancing sideways, he realized the body he had pierced was actually Xian's staff disguised with an illusion talisman. Xian explained that it was a combination of disguise and transformation magic, just enough to lure an idiot like him out into the open, and began walking closer, saying that thanks to that he had managed to complete the entire formation. Inside it, even if Zhu Qi broke free of the paralysis through his higher cultivation, the seal would instantly rebind him. That left only one question: how many purple thunderstrikes could the chief withstand? The attacks began, their intensity cataclysmic, as if a nuclear bombardment was happening in a single point. Sometime later, everything fell silent and the system notification appeared. Pig Demon Chief eliminated. Experience points increased. You have advanced to the 6th realm. New passive ability unlocked. Spiritual Herbology. You may pass this ability to one of your disciples. If cultivated to a high level, they will be able to grow extremely rare spiritual herbs and refine legendary elixirs. Magical Artifact acquired. Earth Gold Hammer. This artifact possesses both earth and metal attributes, capable of storing energy through heavy strikes and granting control over rocks or rapid extraction of metals from stone. Demon Core of the 6th realm obtained. Pig Demon Core, Earth Attribute, can be refined into a high-grade spiritual pill, an essential resource for cultivators seeking breakthroughs. 5 high-quality spiritual stones obtained. Xian sat down and began to eat, remarking that Qifang's spirit-infused steamed buns had an incredible recovery effect, and that he needed to eat quickly to finish clearing out all the remaining trash. A few days later, the protagonist was seated with his disciples. Sanyang asked what had happened to the city of Yizhou, and he replied that after the death of Chief Zhu Kai, most of the lesser demons in the refugee basin had scattered. Sun Qian, the city governor who had been subdued by Qifang, surrendered immediately, and Chenggen's reinforcements sent by the imperial court successfully reclaimed the lost territory and captured the rebel leader, Lord Dog. Both were now being escorted to the capital. Jian picked up the hammers and said they would be useful for a blacksmith as talented as her, handing them over as a gift. Sanyang was surprised and thanked him, while Qifang, jealous, pouted and complained that her master was playing favorites, giving all the gifts to the new sister just because she was prettier, while she, the eldest disciple, never got anything. Sanyang tried to calm her older sister down, saying that only she could use hammers for forging, and that with them she could create new weapons, including a wonderful kitchen knife just for her. Xian then asked Qifang, who said she wouldn't get anything, and showed her the pig demon's essence, the demon core, and the spiritual stones he had acquired. Qifang accepted the pig demon's essence, but said the core itself wasn't something that could be cooked, since it was only useful for alchemists. The protagonist replied that, in that case, he would find a disciple who understood alchemy. Qifang apologized, saying she hadn't meant to offend him, but added that he really was ignorant in some areas. After all, as a transmigrator, he spent all his time cultivating and pointed out that alchemists were extremely rare in the Longyuan kingdom. She explained that even though Longyuan was the nation closest to the demon realm and suffered the most frequent invasions, It faced a severe shortage of alchemical resources, which had led to a massive brain drain. The talented alchemists had all fled to neighboring countries. Xian asked if she was implying that the kingdom lacked the medicinal resources needed for alchemy, and Qifeng confirmed, saying that was exactly it because Long Yuan produced very few spiritual herbs. And even if they had alchemists, without herbs they couldn't refine anything. Sanyang asked if they couldn't import them from other nations, and the protagonist explained that the Shiming Kingdom, which bordered Long Yuan, possessed abundant historical resources, but, due to an ancient conflict, always imposed strict trade restrictions against them. Sanyang, confused, wondered if the fall of Long Yuan to the demons wouldn't also bring consequences for the other nations. Jian replied that, in practice, they didn't care. Other nations only thought about their own short-term gains, and some would even be pleased to see the demons annihilate a rival country. Still, he thought to himself that once Yunshu completed her cultivation, he would pass on the spiritual herbology ability to her, allowing them to cultivate their own spiritual herbs and finally bypass the blockade imposed by the neighboring countries. Jian returned to the table and reflected that during the last battle, even though it had been a spontaneous decision to fight the pig demon chief Zhu Kei, it was still an extremely reckless act. He thought about all his disciples and made a decision. From now on, they would take charge of most of the combat experience, while he would focus on coordinating resources, opening paths, and ensuring steady advancement. Otherwise, if he ever faced a demon of the Eighth Realm, one capable of destroying a mountain with a single strike, he would be completely doomed. Sanyang called to him and asked about the two elder sisters. Xian looked ahead and explained that both were training intensely elsewhere. Yu Hui, meanwhile, had arrived at a forest known as Jianwood, an unclaimed demonic territory beyond the influence of the Great Sex. She remarked that the brat from the Demon Suppression Department had proven quite useful since his information was accurate, then prepared herself, saying that it was time to go all out. Suddenly, a voice shouted, demanding to know who dared to enter his demonic territory. Several men approached, and their leader declared that this territory now belonged to the Sky Thieves sect, and anyone who tried to take it from them would die. It was Park Dong-seok, master of the Sky Thieves sect, Fifth Realm. Yuhui stared at him and asked if he hadn't gotten the name of his sect wrong, since it should be called the Shameless sect, given that they spent their lives stealing other people's techniques and artifacts and claiming them as their own. Seok grew irritated, calling her a little girl, and admitted that his sect did have some reputation issues, but asked if she really needed to insult them like that. One of his soldiers stepped forward and warned that the woman seemed to be from the Zhao family, renowned beastmasters, and that fighting her there could provoke the Zhao family's vengeance later. The soldier suggested it might be wiser to let her go. Annoyed, Seok replied that once she stepped into the demon-infested depths of the forest, whatever happened to her would no longer be their concern. Suddenly, a massive serpent appeared before Yuhui and lunged forward. Using only her ocular power, she controlled a giant panda, commanding it to grab the snake. The panda gathered spiritual energy and breathed fire into it, burning it to ashes. Yu Hui grew irritated and scolded the panda, saying it had burned everything to cinders, and asking what she was supposed to feed the chicks with now. Picking up the demon core, she commented that at least she managed to recover it, otherwise it would have been a total loss. The system appeared and announced, Beastmaster Specialization Infinite Feeding. The description continued, as long as you continue feeding your beasts high-quality demon cores, they can grow endlessly and break through realms. She examined the core and noted that normally demon cores had to be refined into spiritual pills, with cultivators spending months or even years slowly absorbing their energy in hopes of a breakthrough. Beastmasters, on the other hand, usually had to capture higher-ranked creatures or feed them spiritual pills over the long periods. But ever since she had become a disciple, all she had to do was kill demons to gain experience and feed their demon cores directly to her beasts, causing them to grow instantly. Yu Hui looked down and remembered her master's words, who once told her that one day she would be able to summon a phoenix. At the time she had doubted it, but now she truly believed it could happen soon. The core fell into the depths and one of her beasts devoured it as she watched its glow disappear into the shadows. However, she was also being watched. The soldiers asked Seok if he had managed to steal the technique, and he replied that he'd heard such bloodline-exclusive abilities were extremely difficult to copy. Consumed by greed, Seok laughed arrogantly and asked if they were joking, because with the power of his sky theft realm, what technique could he not seize? A mere bloodline ability was nothing compared to his heavenly theft mirror. He declared that the Beastmaster's technique was incredibly rare, and that once he had stolen a few more, he would attack without hesitation, since techniques copied by the heavenly theft mirror only revealed their full potential once the original owner was dead. A little farther ahead, Deep in the heart of the forest, violent explosions echoed in all directions. Demonic trees toppled, the ground was torn apart, and the entire area became a field of devastation. Yuhui looked around, irritated, commenting that the cores from those lesser demons were terrible, wondering where the high-level ones were. Suddenly she felt a sinister presence. That energy was unmistakable. A high-ranking demon appeared before her. Crimson Inferno, the Flower King, a superior demon of the fifth realm. He charged in fury, unleashing fiery petals that sliced through the air. Yu Hui and her beast moved swiftly, dodging each strike. The giant panda roared, took a deep breath, and unleashed countless fireballs that clashed with the Flower King's attacks above, creating a curtain of smoke and embers. Taking advantage of the moment, the panda charged forward with full force, and Yu Hui summoned another of her beasts, which appeared beside her. Together, they synchronized their attacks, creating an immense vortex of fire that consumed the enemy completely. The system glowed before her, notifying, Superior Demon defeated, experience and high-grade demon core acquired. Yu Hui raised the core into the air, saying with disdain that it hadn't been any challenge at all. However, before she could store it away, a hand snatched it from the air. When she turned, she saw Seok grinning wickedly. He declared that the demon core now belonged to him. Yu Hui clenched her fists in anger, saying she wasn't surprised by his behavior, but that he had 3 seconds to return what he stole. The sect leader ignored the warning and ordered his men to attack immediately. One of his disciples, hidden among the trees, prepared to strike, but before he could act, he was suddenly cut down. Seok looked around, confused, not understanding what had happened. Growing impatient, he shouted, asking if his men were asleep. Suddenly, several attacks flew toward him, and he instinctively raised his defenses. When he lowered his shield, he saw the lifeless body of one of his subordinates before him. As he looked up, he saw the panda descending from above, ready to crush him. Seok quickly retreated and threw his shield into the air. The artifact transformed into the legendary Heavenly Theft Mirror, emanating a dense, distorted energy that enveloped the battlefield. He pointed the mirror at the panda, attempting to subdue it and seize control of the beast by force. Guys, if you enjoyed the video, leave a like, comment, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new content. Thank you.